bass dropped at 11:47 p.m., and the floorboards of my own home began to vibrate like a coffin lid being pried open from the inside. I woke in darkness, disoriented, my hand instinctively reaching for the empty space on the bed where Maggie had slept for 43 years. The sheets were cold. They had been cold for 5 years now. But my body still searched for her warmth every single night. Tonight was November 12th, 2024. The 5th anniversary of the day. My world went silent. But my house was screaming. The rhythmic thud of electronic music pulsed through the ceiling, shaking dust from the vintage light fixtures Maggie had picked out at an antique shop in Sedona. I fumbled for my glasses on the nightstand, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the framed photograph of her smiling face, the one taken in our backyard with Camelback Mountain rising behind her like a cathedral of red rock. Edmund Hartley, 72 years old, 35 years, as a forensic auditor, specializing in SEC fraud investigations. I had spent my career tracing shadows through financial statements, finding the lies hidden between decimal points. I had exposed Ponzi schemes, uncovered embezzlement rings, testified in cases that sent executives to federal prison, and somehow, I had missed the predator, living under my own roof. I pulled on my robe, the terry cloth feeling like a burial shroud against my skin, and stepped into the hallway of the Paradise Valley home I had built with Maggie in 1987. Back then, this stretch of Scottsdale was nothing but desert scrub and rattlesnakes. We had watched it transform into one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Arizona, $720,000 of carefully maintained stucco and Spanish tile, surrounded by saguaro cacti and palo verde trees that Maggie had planted herself. The air hit me the moment I opened my bedroom door. Thick, chemical. It was the smell of invasion of strangers, treating my sanctuary like a nightclub. I descended the stairs slowly, my joints protesting in the dry Arizona heat that never fully left. Even in November, each step revealed more of the devastation below. Colored lights strobed across walls hung with Maggie's watercolors. Bodies young, drunk, indifferent, sprawled across furniture she had reupholstered by hand. The sound system, equipment I had never seen before, pumped bass frequencies that rattled the windows. And there, at the center of the chaos, stood my son. Gavin Hartley was 36 years old. He wore a designer watch I didn't recognize, probably purchased with money I would later discover had been stolen from my own accounts. His arm was draped around Nicole Price, his wife of 2 years, a 31-year-old fitness influencer whose smile never quite reached her eyes. They were both holding phones, filming the destruction of my home for an audience of strangers. I scanned the room, searching for the one thing that mattered more to me than the house itself. Maggie's memorial altar, the small table I had set up in the corner of the living room 5 years ago, was supposed to hold her photograph, the porcelain hummingbird she had loved, and the handwritten recipe cards passed down from her mother. It took me a moment to find it. Someone had shoved it into the corner, behind a makeshift bar constructed from sawhorses and plywood. Maggie's photograph lay face down beneath a sweating beer can. The porcelain hummingbird was gone, sold on eBay, I would later discover, for $47. The recipe cards were scattered across the floor, stained with something that looked like blue liquor. Gavin. I spoke his name, but my voice was swallowed by the music. I tried again, louder. Gavin, what have you done? He finally turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to something colder, something I had never seen directed at me before, not in 36 years of birthdays and graduations and the quiet disappointments that accumulate between fathers and sons. Contempt. Pure, unfiltered contempt. Relax, Edmund. He always called me Edmund now, never Dad. We're finally giving this sad little museum a purpose. Mom's been dead for 5 years. Time to move on. The laughter from his guests cut through the bass like broken glass. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. A 72-year-old man in a bathrobe, surrounded by strangers who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle between them and the open bar. Nicole poured something electric blue into a glass resting directly on Maggie's memorial photograph. The condensation would leave a ring, I thought, absurdly, a permanent mark on the last image I had of my wife's smile. I moved toward the altar, my legs heavy, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped animal. And that's when Gavin reached behind the bar and pulled out a rusted metal bowl. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Scout, our chocolate Labrador. Scout had died 3 years ago, supposedly ran away while I was at a conference in Tucson. But looking at the rust, the neglect, the dried residue crusted around the edges, I understood something I had been too blind to see. Scout hadn't run away. Scout had been the first test. The bowl hit the dining table with a sound like a gunshot. Gavin set it down with theatrical precision, the rusted metal scraping against the oak surface. Maggie had polished every Sunday for 30 years. The room fell silent, even the bass seemed to retreat, as if the music itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. I stared at Scout's bowl. The rust had eaten through the enamel in patches, revealing raw metal beneath. There were scratch marks along the rim, the desperate grooves of an animal trying to get every last drop of water from a dish that hadn't been filled in days, maybe weeks. Scout hadn't run away. Scout had been starved, neglected, disposed of like an inconvenient expense while I was 200 miles away in Tucson, trusting my son to care for the family dog. This was not grief. This was evidence. Gavin reached into a grocery bag and pulled out a can of wet dog food. The cheap kind. The brown gelatinous mass that smelled like iron and decay. He cracked the pull tab with a sharp metallic snap and dumped the contents into the bowl. The sound it made, that wet, heavy squelch, turned my stomach in ways that 35 years of financial autopsies never had. This is what freeloaders eat, Edmund. His voice carried across the silent room, pitched for the cameras. 20 phones were raised now, their LED lights creating a constellation of digital witnesses. Nicole stood beside him, her smile frozen in place, her eyes calculating the engagement metrics of my humiliation. In this house, everyone earns their keep. Even on Mom's precious Memorial Day. The word precious dripped with mockery. He wasn't just insulting me, he was desecrating Maggie's memory in front of an audience, turning our grief into content. I looked at the faces around me. Some were strangers, Gavin's influencer friends, people who measured their worth in followers and brand deals. But others I recognized, the Hendersons from across the street, Maria from the HOA, Dr. Patterson, who had treated my blood pressure for 15 years. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They just watched. Their expressions a mixture of discomfort and morbid fascination, waiting to see if the old man would cry. I didn't cry. Something far more dangerous happened instead. A forensic auditor learns early that rage is a liability. Emotion, clouds, judgment, corrupts data, leads to mistakes that defense attorneys exploit in court. I had spent decades training myself to feel nothing when I uncovered fraud to treat stolen millions and ruined lives as entries in a spreadsheet. Cold numbers that told stories without sentiment. That training saved my life in this moment. I looked at the dog bowl, then at my son's phone, the lens capturing my silence for 1,000 strangers to witness. I felt the rage. Oh, I felt it, but I didn't let it move my face. I packed it away in a compartment deep inside my chest, where it could freeze into something useful. Thank you for the reminder, Gavin. My voice came out flat, neutral. The same tone I had used when presenting findings to SEC commissioners who didn't want to hear that their colleagues were criminals. I reached down and picked up the bowl. The metal was cold, biting into my palms with an abrasive texture that felt like penance. Brown liquid sloshed against the sides, speckling my robe with stains that would never come out. I will make sure this memorial meal is properly accounted for. Gavin's smile flickered. He had expected tears, begging, the performance of a broken old man that would play well on social media, that would support whatever narrative he had been constructing about my declining mental state. Instead, I turned and walked toward the stairs. Wait. Nicole's voice cut through the silence. Where are you going? I didn't answer. I climbed the stairs slowly. Scout's bowl balanced in my hands like evidence being transported to a forensic lab. Behind me, the music kicked back in. Someone had decided the show was over, that the old man had retreated in defeat. They were wrong. I reached my bedroom and closed the door. The lock engaged with a satisfying click, the most honest sound I had heard all night. I walked to my nightstand and set the bowl down next to Maggie's unfinished knitting and the memorial candle I had planned to light at midnight. The metallic clang echoed through my grief. I sat on the edge of the bed and studied the bowl with clinical detachment. The rust patterns, the scratch marks, the way the enamel had been worn away by persistent, desperate licking. This wasn't the dish of a dog that had been loved and then accidentally lost. This was a test run. My son had learned how to neglect a living creature slowly, methodically, without triggering suspicion. He had discovered that I was too distracted by my own grief to notice when something I loved was being starved to death under my own roof. And now he was applying that knowledge to me. I pulled my laptop from the nightstand drawer and opened it. The blue glow reflected in my glasses as I logged into my secondary checking account, the one I had set up decades ago for emergency forensic expenses. The one Gavin didn't know existed. The spreadsheet cells flickered into existence, waiting for the truth. Row 1. Category: Elder abuse. Subject: Edmund Hartley. Perpetrator: Gavin Hartley. Status: Investigation initiated. I had spent 40 years finding the lies hidden in other people's ledgers. Now I would find the lies hidden in my own family. I didn't sleep that night. The music finally died around 3 a.m., replaced by the sounds of stumbling footsteps and car doors slamming in my driveway. I sat at my desk in the darkness, the laptop's blue glow painting shadows across the walls as I methodically documented every financial irregularity I could access from my bedroom. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. My secondary Chase account, the one I had trusted Gavin to help manage after my cataract surgery last spring, showed a pattern of unauthorized transfers stretching back 14 months. Small amounts at first, 100 here, 200 there. The kind of withdrawals that could be dismissed as ATM fees or automatic payments. But a forensic auditor doesn't see individual transactions. A forensic auditor sees patterns. The pattern told me that someone had been bleeding my accounts with surgical precision, timing the withdrawals to coincide with my prescription refill dates, days when I was already groggy, already confused, already easy to dismiss as an old man losing his grip on reality. I pulled up my primary checking account next. The password had been changed. I tried the backup, also changed. My savings account required a security question I didn't remember setting. What is your son's first pet's name? Scout. They had used my dead dog's name to lock me out of my own money. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, listening to the house settle into silence. The party was over. The guests had scattered. Somewhere down the hall, Gavin and Nicole were sleeping off the champagne they had purchased with my credit card, and I was making a decision that would determine whether I lived or died. The go bag was hidden in the back of my closet, behind a box of Maggie's winter clothes I couldn't bring myself to donate. I had packed it 3 months ago, not because I had suspected my son of anything, but because 35 years of investigating fraud had taught me that everyone needs an exit strategy. Inside, my passport, $2,000 in cash, a week's worth of heart medication I had verified was safe, a burner phone still in its packaging, and a leather folio containing the original deed to my house. I added the thumb drive with my preliminary financial findings and the dog bowl itself, evidence of what had been done to Scout and what was being done to me. At 4:17 a.m., I crept down the stairs. The house smelled like the aftermath of a crime scene: stale alcohol, cigarette smoke that wasn't supposed to be inside, and something chemical that made my eyes water. The living room was destroyed. Red Solo cups covered every surface. Someone had ground a cigarette out on Maggie's hand-woven rug from Santa Fe. I paused at her memorial altar. They hadn't bothered to clean it. Her photograph still lay face down in a puddle of dried blue liquor. The recipe cards were scattered across the floor, like fallen leaves. I knelt my knees, protesting against the cold tile, and gathered them carefully, slipping them into my jacket pocket. These belonged to her mother. These were the last physical connection to a lineage of women who had cooked with love and served with grace. I took the photograph too. I would not leave her face in this desecrated place. The garage door was the quietest exit. I had oiled the hinges myself last month, a habit from decades of living with Maggie, who slept so lightly that a creaking door could wake her from across the house. The mechanism lifted smoothly, revealing my Honda Accord in the pre-dawn darkness. I loaded the go bag into the trunk. The weight of it, 7 pounds of survival, felt like nothing compared to the weight I was leaving behind. The keys trembled slightly in my hand as I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 4:23 a.m. The temperature gauge showed 52 degrees cold for the Arizona desert, even in November. I backed out of the driveway without turning on my headlights. The neighborhood was silent, the Spanish tile roofs glinting under street lamps. Every house a carefully maintained facade hiding whatever rot grew behind the stucco walls. I had lived here for 37 years. I had raised my son in that house. I had buried my wife from that house. I had planned to die in that house. Surrounded by memories and the desert garden Maggie had planted with her own hands. Now I was fleeing it like a refugee. The travel lodge near Sky Harbor Airport was 17 miles away, far enough to disappear, close enough to return when the time was right. I had chosen it specifically because it accepted cash, asked no questions, and catered to the kind of transient anonymity that would make me invisible. Room 114. The clerk, a tired woman in her 20s named Shannon, didn't look up as I counted out $67 in wrinkled bills. She slid a plastic keycard through the slot without comment. Checkout is at 11. I walked down the corridor, the industrial carpet muffling my footsteps, the fluorescent lights humming a frequency that matched the vibration of my own exhaustion. The room smelled like disinfectant and recycled air. The bedspread was polyester. The walls were beige. It was perfect. I set the dog bowl on the nightstand, next to Maggie's photograph and her recipe cards. I arranged my evidence on the small circular table, the thumb drive, the printed bank statements, the preliminary spreadsheet I had started in my bedroom. Then I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and allowed myself 30 seconds of grief. 30 seconds to mourn the son I had raised. 30 seconds to grieve the relationship that had died somewhere between his first lie and his last laugh. 30 seconds to feel the full weight of a father's failure. Then I opened the laptop. The clock read 5:47 a.m. The banks would open in 3 hours, and when they did, I would begin the systematic dismantling of everything my son thought he had stolen. The motel room became my war room. I cleared the small circular table, sweeping aside a plastic tray of complimentary instant coffee and a laminated card advertising the airport shuttle. The surface was sticky with something I didn't want to identify, but I covered it with a clean towel from my go bag and arranged my evidence kit with the same precision I had once used to prepare for SEC depositions. The dog bowl sat in the center like an exhibit marker. Around it, I spread the printed bank statements, the preliminary spreadsheet, and the thumb drive, containing everything I had managed to download before my passwords were changed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air conditioning rattled in its housing. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed, and footsteps retreated toward the ice machine. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And for the first time in 2 years, my mind was clear. That clarity itself was evidence. For months, perhaps longer, I had been waking with a heavy, leaden feeling in my limbs, a cognitive fog I had attributed to grief, to age, to the slow erosion that comes with watching your world shrink after your wife dies. I had felt like a man walking through waist-deep water, struggling to reach the shore of a clear thought. Now, sitting in this anonymous motel room, with its recycled air and polyester bedspread, I felt sharp, alert, present, which meant something had been making me dull. I opened my laptop and navigated to my pharmacy portal. The login still worked. Apparently Gavin hadn't thought to change this password. Or perhaps he wanted me to have access to my own medication records. The irony would become clear soon enough. The screen loaded, and I began scrolling through my prescription history. Lisinopril for blood pressure, atorvastatin for cholesterol, metformin for the pre-diabetes my doctor had warned me about. All standard medications for a 72-year-old man with a sedentary lifestyle and a tendency to eat his feelings after losing his wife. But there was something else. A prescription for diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, filled 3 times in the past 4 months. 50 milligram tablets, quantities of 60 each time. The prescribing physician was listed as Dr. Robert Callahan, a name I didn't recognize. From a telehealth service I had never used. Someone had been ordering sleep medication in my name. I pulled up the telehealth service's website and found the appointment history. 3 video consultations, all conducted between 2 and 3 p.m. on weekdays, times when I was typically napping in my study. Groggy from the herbal tea Nicole had started preparing for me every afternoon. The consultation notes described a patient presenting with severe insomnia and anxiety related to grief. The patient, supposedly me, had requested sleep aids and expressed concern about his deteriorating memory. I had never made these appointments. I had never spoken to this doctor, but someone had used my insurance information, my date of birth, and apparently a video feed of an elderly man who could have been anyone sitting in a dimly lit room. Arizona's relaxed telehealth regulations had made it remarkably easy to obtain a chemical leash for an inconvenient father. I cross-referenced the prescription fill dates with my own calendar. Each refill coincided with a week when Nicole had been particularly attentive about my afternoon tea routine. Each refill preceded a period when I had felt especially confused, especially tired, especially unlike myself. They hadn't just been stealing my money. They had been stealing my mind. I sat back in the creaking motel chair and let the full weight of the discovery settle over me. My own son had been drugging me, systematically, methodically, using over-the-counter sleep medication dissolved in herbal tea to create symptoms that mimicked dementia, confusion, memory loss, disorientation, the gradual erosion of cognitive function. And I had blamed myself. I had believed I was losing my grip on reality. I had started to wonder if Maggie's death had broken something in my brain that couldn't be repaired. That was the cruelest part. Not the theft, not the humiliation. The cruelest part was making me believe I was disappearing. I opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting the pharmaceutical fraud with the same cold precision I had once applied to corporate embezzlement cases. Date, prescription, quantity, prescriber, correlation with behavioral symptoms. The pattern was undeniable, but I needed more. I needed to understand why. Why would a son drug his own father? What was the endgame? Gavin wasn't patient enough for a slow inheritance scheme. He wanted something faster, something more immediate than waiting for an old man to die of natural causes. I navigated to my cloud storage account, the one linked to the home computer I rarely used anymore, and began searching for files I hadn't accessed in months. If Gavin had been using that computer while I was sedated in the afternoons, there might be traces. Browser history. 18 Seth. Downloaded documents. The digital breadcrumbs of a conspiracy. The search results loaded, and there it was. A folder I had never created, buried 3 levels deep in the directory structure, labeled with a name that made my blood run cold. Project Legacy. I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of files. Spreadsheets, legal documents, browser bookmarks, a timeline that stretched from 18 months ago to a date 3 days from now, November 15th, 2024. The first document I opened was titled, "In the Matter of the Incapacity of Edmund Hartley." It was a guardianship petition, fully drafted, ready to file. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was preparing to have me declared legally incompetent, to take control of my assets, my medical decisions, My entire life under the guise of caring for a father who had tragically succumbed to dementia. And the dog bowl incident at the memorial party? That was supposed to be the final proof of my instability. I spent the next 4 hours performing the most important audit of my career. The Project Legacy folder was a treasure trove of self-incrimination, the kind of evidence that would have made any prosecutor weep with gratitude. Gavin had documented his own conspiracy with the meticulous detail of someone who never expected to be caught. I started with the financial spreadsheets. The master ledger tracked every dollar siphoned from my accounts over the past 18 months, categorized with the cold efficiency of a corporate expense report. There were columns for date, amount, source account, and most damning of all, a column labeled cover story that detailed the lies told to explain each withdrawal. February 2023, $3,400 from primary checking. Cover story. Dad authorized new security system. April 2023, $8,500 from savings. Cover story. Investment in Gavin's startup. July 2023, $12,000 from retirement account. Cover story. Emergency medical expense. The entries continued for pages, each one a knife wound I hadn't felt until now. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet made my chest tighten. $163,247. $163,000. Stolen in amounts small enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Spread across enough accounts to obscure the pattern. Justified with lies I had apparently believed because I was too drugged to question them. But the money was only the beginning. I opened the next file, a browser bookmark folder labeled Research. Inside were dozens of saved links, each one a window into my son's education in elder abuse. Arizona guardianship laws for elderly incompetence. How to use diphenhydramine for elderly sedation. Early onset dementia symptoms versus Benadryl side effects. Life insurance policy beneficiary, change after incapacity. Memory care facilities, Phoenix AZ monthly cost. The last bookmark chilled me more than all the others combined. Gavin had been researching memory care facilities, the kind of places where families warehouse their inconvenient elderly, where a man could be sedated into silence and forgotten while his assets were liquidated. He wasn't planning to kill me. He was planning to erase me. I moved to the legal documents next. The guardianship petition was comprehensive, 12 pages of carefully crafted lies designed to convince a judge that Edmund Hartley had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer manage his own affairs. The petition cited specific incidents as evidence of my decline. Forgetting to pay utility bills, bills that had been automatically redirected to Gavin's email, getting lost while driving to familiar locations, trips I had made while sedated, with no memory of the confusion. Leaving the stove on overnight, an incident I didn't remember at all, which meant it had either been fabricated or staged while I was chemically incapacitated. 3 witnesses were listed at the bottom of the petition. I recognized the names. They had all been at the memorial party. Watching as Gavin placed the dog bowl in front of me, they were prepared to testify that they had personally witnessed my mental deterioration. The filing date was set for November 15th, 2024. I sat back and let the timeline crystallize in my mind. The memorial party hadn't been a spontaneous act of cruelty. It had been a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to generate witnesses who could support the guardianship petition. Gavin had invited specific people he knew would be credible in court, and then provoked a confrontation that would make me look confused, agitated, unstable. He had turned my grief into a weapon against me. But there was one more file in the folder. One I almost missed, buried at the bottom of the directory with a file name that looked like random characters. I opened it. It was a life insurance document. A policy I didn't remember purchasing, taken out 18 months ago through an online broker. The coverage amount was $500,000. The beneficiary was Gavin Hartley, and there was a pending request, dated just 4 days ago, to change the policy's payout trigger from death to permanent incapacitation requiring institutional care. My son wasn't just betting on my death. He was betting on my disappearance. The policy would pay out the moment I was committed to a memory care facility. Gavin would collect $500,000 for successfully erasing his father from the world, and I would spend whatever remained of my life in a chemical fog, unable to speak, unable to fight, unable to tell anyone what had been done to me. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the motel room. The air conditioning hummed. A plane roared overhead, climbing toward somewhere else. The dog bowl sat on the nightstand, rusted and empty, a monument to everything my son had become. I had 35 years of experience finding fraud. I had testified in cases that sent executives to prison. I had traced money through shell companies, offshore accounts, and criminal enterprises that spanned continents. But I had never audited my own family. Until now, I opened a new document and began typing the report that would destroy my son's life or save my own. Executive summary. On the 12th of November 2024, the subject Edmund Hartley initiated an investigation into suspected elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud perpetrated by his son, Gavin Hartley, and daughter-in-law, Nicole Price. Total documented theft, $163,247. Estimated additional damages, pending. Recommended action, immediate asset freeze, criminal referral, eviction. The banks opened in 45 minutes. I had work to do. The first call I made was to my cardiologist. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto had been managing my heart condition for 12 years. She knew my medical history better than anyone alive. And more importantly, she had known Maggie. They had served together on the board of the Scottsdale Arts Council before the cancer made meetings impossible. I trusted her. And trust, I was learning, was the rarest currency in my shrinking world. "Patricia," I said when she answered her private line, "I need Wood to order a comprehensive toxicology panel today, and I need the results kept completely confidential, not shared with anyone who might call claiming to be my family." There was a pause. "Edmund? What's going on?" I explained the diphenhydramine prescriptions, the telehealth appointments I had never made, the herbal tea that Nicole had been preparing every afternoon for the past 4 months, the fog that had lifted the moment I stopped consuming anything prepared in my own kitchen. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 10 seconds. Then Patricia's voice returned, cold and professional in a way I had never heard before. "Come to my office at 2 o'clock. Use the back entrance. I'll have the phlebotomist waiting." I spent the hours before the appointment documenting the chemical timeline. The pattern was surgical in its precision. Nicole had started her tea ritual in early July, right around the time the first telehealth prescription was filled. She would bring it to my study around 2 p.m., claiming the herbal blend helped with grief-related insomnia and the dry Arizona heat. I remembered the taste now: chamomile with something underneath. A faint, chalky bitterness I had dismissed as minerals in the well water. I remembered the warmth spreading through my limbs, the heaviness in my eyelids, the way the afternoon light seemed to blur at the edges. I had thought I was grieving. I had thought I was getting old. I had thought the fog was the natural consequence of losing the woman I had loved for 47 years. But grief doesn't have a dosage schedule. The toxicology results came back at 4:37 p.m. Dr. Yamamoto called me personally, her voice tight, with barely contained fury. "Edmund, you have elevated levels of diphenhydramine metabolites in your system consistent with chronic daily exposure over an extended period. Based on the concentration, I estimate you've been receiving doses of 50 to 75 milligrams daily for approximately 4 months." I wrote the numbers in my notebook. What would that do to someone my age? Cognitive impairment, memory gaps, confusion, difficulty concentrating. Patricia paused. "Edmund, at your age, with your cardiac history, chronic diphenhydramine exposure could cause symptoms virtually indistinguishable from early-stage dementia. Anyone looking at you over the past few months would have seen exactly what they expected to see: an elderly man declining after his wife's death." I closed my eyes. That was the point. I'm filing a report with the Arizona Medical Board about those telehealth prescriptions. Patricia's voice hardened. And Edmund, I want you to know that I've already flagged your file. If anyone calls claiming to be your son and asking about your cognitive status, they will be told nothing and reported to the authorities. Thank you, Patricia. One more thing. She hesitated. The diphenhydramine levels in your blood are dropping rapidly now that you've stopped exposure. Within 72 hours, you should be completely clear. But Edmund, you need to understand what this means legally. I understood. The fog was lifting. And when it cleared completely, I would be able to testify with absolute clarity about everything that had been done to me. I returned to the motel room with the lab results tucked into my evidence folio. The chemical fog had been more than just a method of control, it had been a rehearsal. Gavin had been conditioning everyone around me to see symptoms that would support his guardianship petition. The neighbors who noticed I seemed confused. The pharmacist who commented on my forgetfulness. The bank teller who had to repeat instructions 3 times. All of them had been unwitting witnesses to a crime in progress. I pulled up the Project Legacy timeline on my laptop and cross-referenced it with the drugging schedule. The correlation was perfect. Every major milestone in Gavin's plan coincided with a period of elevated sedation. July 2024. Drugging begins. First, guardianship research searches. August 2024. Increased dosage. Edmund forgets to pay utility bills. September 2024. Life insurance policy modification requested. Edmund gets lost driving to familiar locations. October 2024. Witness list compiled. Edmund leaves stove on overnight. November 2024. Memorial party staged. Guardianship petition finalized. He had been building a case against me with the same methodical patience I had once used to build cases against corporate criminals. Every confused moment, every memory lapse, every stumble had been manufactured and documented. The man I raised had become a predator, and I had been his laboratory animal. I looked at the toxicology report one more time. The numbers were damning. Clear, clinical proof that I had been chemically incapacitated. Combined with the telehealth records, the prescription history, and the Project Legacy files, I had enough evidence to destroy my son's life. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed to act before November 15th, before the guardianship petition could be filed. I picked up the burner phone and dialed the number I had memorized 20 years ago, a contact from my SEC days who had gone on to become one of the most feared elder abuse attorneys in Arizona. "Diana," I said when she answered. "It's Edmund Hartley. I need to hire you, and I need you to understand that the target of this case is my own son." The silence lasted 3 seconds. "I'll clear my afternoon," she said. I looked at the evidence spread across the motel table. The dog bowl, the lab results, the Project Legacy files, the $163,000 in documented theft. "I can be there in 30 minutes. Bring everything." I grabbed my folio and headed for the door. The fog had lifted. Now it was time to burn down the lies. Diana Blackwell's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Scottsdale, the kind of building where the rent alone could fund a small family for a year. I had known Diana for 23 years, since the days when we both worked SEC investigations and shared coffee over case files thick enough to stop bullets. She had left government work a decade ago to start her own practice, specializing in elder abuse litigation, a field that paid less than corporate law but, as she once told me, allowed her to sleep at night. The receptionist led me to a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Camelback Mountain. Diana was already waiting, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed something on her tablet. "Edmund." She stood and clasped my hand, not a handshake, but a grip, a hold, the kind of gesture that said she understood I was drowning, and she was throwing me a line. "Sit down. Show me everything." I spent the next 2 hours walking her through the evidence. I started with the financial documents, the spreadsheets from Project Legacy showing every dollar stolen, every lie told, Every cover story fabricated. Diana's expression remained neutral, but I noticed her jaw tighten when I reached the total. $163,247. Then came the medical evidence, the toxicology report, the telehealth prescription records, the correlation between the drugging schedule and the manufactured incidence of cognitive decline. Diana removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Edmund, what you're describing isn't just theft. It's systematic chemical incapacitation with intent to defraud. In Arizona, that carries felony charges for poisoning, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. I know. Your son is looking at 15 to 20 years if this goes to criminal trial. I know that too. She studied my face for a long moment. And you're prepared for that? To send your own child to prison? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of 36 years of birthdays and graduations, and the small disappointments that accumulate between fathers and sons. He stopped being my child the moment he started drugging me, I said. What's sitting in that house now is a predator wearing my son's face. Diana nodded slowly. Then, let's make sure the predator faces consequences. She pulled up the Project Legacy files on her own screen and began dissecting them with the surgical precision of someone who had spent decades finding the weak points in legal armor. This guardianship petition, she said, scrolling through the document. It's actually quite sophisticated. Your son did his research, or someone did it for him. The witness list includes 3 people with professional credentials in social services and elder care. If this had been filed as planned, a judge might have granted temporary guardianship within 72 hours. Temporary guardianship? Enough to freeze your accounts, revoke your driver's license, and begin the process of committing you to a memory care facility. Diana's voice was clinical, but I could hear the anger beneath it. Once you're in the system, Edmund, it's almost impossible to get out. You would have been drugged, isolated, and declared incompetent before anyone thought to question the narrative. I thought about the memory care facility Gavin had bookmarked in his research. $5,000 a month. The exact amount my pension and Social Security provided. He was budgeting me into a cage. I said, worse than that. Diana pulled up another document. This life insurance policy with the modified payout trigger? If you were committed to institutional care, Gavin would have collected $500,000 while you were still alive. He would have profited from your disappearance without having to wait for your death. The insurance company approved this? The modification request is still pending. They flagged it for review because the policyholder you didn't sign the request in person. Diana smiled grimly. Your son forged your signature. Badly, I might add. The insurance company's fraud department was already investigating when you walked through my door. One small piece of good fortune in a sea of betrayal. Diana spent another hour documenting the legal strategy. She would file for an emergency restraining order against Gavin and Nicole, preventing them from accessing my accounts, entering my property without permission, or contacting my medical providers. Simultaneously, she would submit the evidence package to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office for criminal review. The eviction notice, she explained, needs to be served by a professional process server, someone with body cameras and legal training who can document the delivery. I have a contact who specializes in high-conflict situations. Retired Phoenix PD. His name is Marcus Webb. How soon can he serve the papers? If I file the emergency orders today, we can have the notice served by Monday morning. Diana checked her calendar. That gives your son exactly 14 days to vacate the premises under Arizona law. If he refuses, we escalate to criminal trespassing charges. What about the guardianship petition? Diana's smile was predatory. The moment I file our counter-documentation, the toxicology report, the forged prescriptions, the Project Legacy files, any judge in this state will see the petition for what it is. A conspiracy to commit fraud. Not only will it be dismissed, but the witnesses your son recruited may face charges for filing false statements. I sat back in the leather chair, feeling the weight of the past 48 hours pressing down on my shoulders. 2 days ago, I had been a confused old man drinking drugged tea in my own kitchen, watching my mind disappear into a chemical fog. Now I was sitting in a lawyer's office, preparing to destroy my son's life with the same forensic precision I had once used to destroy corporate criminals. Edmund. Diana's voice softened. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Ask. Is there any part of you that wants to give him a chance? A path to redemption that doesn't involve prison? I thought about the dog bowl, the rusted metal, the scratch marks from Scout's desperate attempts to find water. I thought about Maggie's photograph, lying face down in a puddle of blue liquor. I thought about the 4 months of manufactured dementia, the careful erosion of my identity, the systematic transformation of a grieving father into a profit center. No, I said. There isn't. Diana nodded and began typing. The war had officially begun. Diana's conference room became our war room. For the next 6 hours, we transformed her mahogany table into a crime scene, spreading documents across its surface like evidence photographs. Her paralegal, a young woman named Sarah with sharp eyes and faster fingers, created digital folders while I walked them through 18 months of financial betrayal. Let's start with the transfers, Diana said, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Walk me through each one. I opened my laptop. The 14th of February 2023, Valentine's Day. Gavin called, crying about his security company startup. Said he needed $3,400 for licensing fees. I remember thinking how odd it was he never calls on holidays. And you transferred the money? Within the hour. He'd emailed me the licensing documents. I have them here. I pulled up the PDF. Fake. The Arizona Department of Public Safety has no record of any license application in his name. Diana made a note. That's fraud. Continue. April brought $8,500 for equipment. July demanded $12,000 for a medical emergency, Nicole's supposed surgery that never happened. September saw $15,000 for investor matching, a term Gavin had clearly pulled from a late-night infomercial about cryptocurrency. The progression is textbook, Diana observed. Small asks to establish compliance, then escalating demands once he confirmed you'd pay without verification. I nodded. I was drugged by then. The diphenhydramine started in July, same month as the medical emergency. Leg 43. RCBO. Lextana. Leg 43. They needed you compliant for the larger withdrawals, and confused enough to miss the inconsistencies. Sarah projected the timeline on the wall. The correlation was damning. Every major theft aligned with periods of documented cognitive impairment. Gavin hadn't just stolen from me, he'd chemically manufactured my compliance. Total documented theft through direct transfers. $163,247, Sarah announced. That's just the beginning, I said. Pull up the credit card statements. Thanks for watching. That's just the beginning. The American Express revealed a secondary hemorrhage. $4,200 in cryptocurrency purchases I never authorized. $2,800 at electronics stores. Items that never appeared in my home. $1,400 at restaurants in Tempe, a city I hadn't visited in 2 years. The fraudulent charges totaled another $47,000. He added himself as an authorized user, Diana said, examining the card agreement. Forged your signature. That's identity theft and fraud, separate from the wire transfers. There's more. I opened the utility bills. Our electricity usage had tripled over the past year, jumping from $180 monthly to over $540. The pattern made no sense until Sarah pulled up Gavin's browsing history from the Project Legacy folder. Cryptocurrency mining, she said, turning her laptop toward us. He set up a mining rig in your garage, used your electricity, your address for registration, your identity for the exchange accounts, which means any tax liability falls on you, along with regulatory exposure if he violated securities laws. Diana removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Edmund, we're looking at over $200,000 in direct losses, potential tax fraud, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation. Under Arizona Revised Statutes 46 to 456, this qualifies for felony prosecution. I know the statute. I helped draft the federal guidelines it's based on. She smiled grimly. Then, you know what comes next. Asset freeze, criminal referral, eviction proceedings. I can have an emergency petition before a judge by tomorrow morning. But Edmund, she leaned forward. Once we file, there's no going back. This becomes public record. Your son will be arrested. I thought about Maggie. About the hummingbird figurine he'd sold for $47. About Scout's rusted bowl. And the 18 months of chemical fog. File everything. The emergency motion landed on Judge Rebecca Torres's desk at 8:47 a.m. on the 14th of November 2024. By 9:15, we had our first victory. A temporary restraining order freezing all accounts connected to Gavin's name, including the cryptocurrency exchange where he'd parked his stolen gains. By noon, I received confirmation that my credit cards had been canceled and reissued. The new cards would be sent to a P.O. box that only Diana and I knew existed. At 2:30 p.m., we filed the criminal complaint with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. At 4:15 p.m., Diana received a call that made her go pale. The guardianship petition, she said, setting down her phone. It was filed this morning. Before our motion, my chest tightened. What does that mean? It means Gavin knew we were moving. Someone tipped him off, or he had automated alerts on your accounts. She pulled up the court filing. He's claiming you're a danger to yourself. Lists the party incident as evidence of erratic behavior and cognitive decline. Says you wandered into your own living room confused about where you were. Because I was times drugged asterisk. We know that. But the judge won't, not until we present the toxicology report. She glanced at her watch. The guardianship hearing is scheduled for November 18th. 4 days. I felt the familiar fog trying to creep back in. The chemical echo of months under sedation. But my mind was clearing now. Sharpening with each hour the diphenhydramine left my system. Then we have 4 days to destroy his case. Diana nodded slowly. I'll subpoena the pharmacy records, the telehealth provider, and the cardiologist's toxicology report. We'll need character witnesses who can testify to your baseline cognitive function before the drugging began. My accountant. My former colleagues at the bureau. My neighbors. Good. I'll also file a motion to consolidate, if we can get both the criminal charges and the guardianship petition before the same judge. We can demonstrate the fraudulent foundation of his claim. I stood and walked to the window. Scottsdale spread out below us, the same city where I'd raised a son who now wanted me declared incompetent so he could steal my home. There's something else, I said quietly. What? The life insurance policy. $500,000, beneficiary Gavin, with a clause for permanent incapacitation. Diana's face went slack. You're saying... I'm saying the guardianship isn't the endgame. It's the setup. Once he has legal control, he can move me to a facility of his choosing. Facilities where documentation can be managed. The unspoken word hung between us. Asterisk. Murder. Asterisk. Edmund. If you're right, I spent 34 years investigating white-collar criminals. I know exactly what I'm right about. I turned to face her. My son isn't just stealing from me. He's positioning to kill me, and he's using the legal system as his weapon. The next 72 hours became a masterclass in reconstruction. I started with Margaret Chen, my neighbor of 15 years. She answered her door in gardening gloves, soil still clinging to her fingertips, and her face shifted from surprise to concern the moment she saw me. Edmund, my God, you look... She caught herself. That's exactly what I need to talk to you about. We sat in her sunroom, surrounded by orchids she'd been tending since her husband passed. I explained everything. The drugging, the theft, the The guardianship petition. Her hands trembled as she listened. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. Last August, I waved to you from my driveway. You stared right through me, Edmund. Like you didn't know who I was. I told Harold she caught herself at her late husband's name. I told myself, you were just grieving. 5 years since Maggie, alone in that big house. It wasn't grief. It was diphenhydramine, that boy. Her jaw tightened. That boy Times and his wife. I saw them, you know, carrying boxes out of your garage in September. Electronics, it looked like. I almost called. But Nicole waved and smiled. And I thought, you thought family was helping family. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Be my witness. Margaret Chen signed her affidavit that afternoon, documenting 18 months of observed cognitive decline that began abruptly in July 2023, the exact month the drugging started, and the suspicious activities she'd witnessed, but misinterpreted. Thomas Brennan was harder to reach. My former supervisor at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had retired to a ranch outside Tucson, where he raised quarter horses and pretended the bureau had never existed. But when I called, his voice carried the same steel I remembered from 30 years of working fraud cases together. Eddie Hartley. I heard you'd gone quiet. Some of the boys thought you'd finally lost it. Not lost. Stolen. I drove 4 hours to tell him in person. Thomas listened without interrupting, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug that read, World's Okayest Grandpa. When I finished, he set the mug down with deliberate care. Your own son. My own son. And you need me to testify that you're not incompetent. I need you to testify that 6 months ago, I helped you untangle a Ponzi scheme your grandson almost invested in, that I identified the shell companies, traced the money flow, and wrote a 17-page analysis that saved your family $340,000. Thomas smiled grimly. I still have that analysis. Kept it because it was the most beautiful piece of forensic work I'd seen in 20 years. He stood and extended his hand. I'll be in Phoenix on the 18th. And Eddie? When this is over, I know some people who would be very interested in your son's cryptocurrency activities. IRS, SEC, FinCEN. Take your pick. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto provided the medical foundation. Her affidavit documented my baseline cognitive assessments from annual physicals dating back 12 years, all showing exceptional mental acuity, memory function, and analytical capability. She then detailed the toxicology findings. Sustained diphenhydramine exposure, causing documented impairment that began resolving within 72 hours of cessation. The timeline is unambiguous, she wrote. Mr. Hartley's cognitive decline was chemically induced, not organic. His current presentation shows complete restoration of baseline function, consistent with the elimination half-life of diphenhydramine. Her conclusion was damning. Any claims of permanent cognitive impairment or dementia are medically unsupportable and appear designed to misrepresent Mr. Hartley's true mental state. The final witness surprised even me. Rosa Delgado had cleaned my house every Thursday for 11 years. She was 63, originally from Hermosillo, and had raised 4 children while working 3 jobs. I found her at her daughter's restaurant in South Phoenix, rolling tamales for the weekend rush. Senor Hartley. She wiped her hands on her apron, flour dusting her forearms. I tried to call you. Many times. Your son, he told me you didn't want me anymore. That you said, she hesitated. What did he say, I said. That I was stealing. Her eyes glistened. 11 years. And he told me, you accused me of stealing. The rage I'd carefully compartmentalized threatened to break free. Gavin hadn't just stolen from me. He'd destroyed a relationship built on a decade of trust. And he'd done it by weaponizing my reputation against a woman who had never taken so much as a paperclip. Rosa, I never said that. I never thought that. I was drugged, and my son used that to isolate me from everyone who might have noticed what was happening. She crossed herself. Dios mío, I need you to testify. About what you saw. About how things changed. Rosa sat down heavily on a plastic chair. The tea, she said quietly. What? His wife. Nicole. She started making you tea in July. Special tea, she called it. Herbs for relaxation. I thought it was kind. But after that, she looked up at me. You stopped remembering my name. You called me Maria once. And you never forget names. Senor Hartley. Never. The tea. The same delivery mechanism Miranda had used in the Caldwell case. Chemical submission dressed as care. Will you write that down? Exactly what you observed? I will write everything. Her voice hardened. And I will tell the judge what kind of son poisons his own father and blames the cleaning lady. By November 17th, I had assembled a fortress of testimony. Diana spread the affidavits across her conference table. Margaret Chen on behavioral changes. Thomas Brennan on cognitive capability. Dr. Yamamoto on medical evidence. Rosa Delgado on the tea and isolation tactics. Combined with the financial documentation, the cryptocurrency records, and the project legacy files, we had constructed an airtight counter-narrative. Tomorrow morning, Diana said, we destroy his case. Tomorrow morning, I replied. We begin destroying his freedom. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Asterisk Dad. Please. We need to talk before court. I can explain everything. Meet me at the house tonight. Alone. G. Asterisk. I showed Diana the message. It's a trap, she said immediately. Obviously, you're not going. I pocketed my phone. I'm absolutely going. But I won't be alone. I arrived at my own home like a stranger. The Paradise Valley house sat dark against the November sky. Its windows black mirrors reflecting the last orange streaks of sunset. I'd lived here for 23 years, raised a son in these rooms, buried a wife from this address, built a life inside these walls. Now I approached it like a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was. Detective Marcus Webb sat beside me in the unmarked sedan, his badge clipped to his belt, and his service weapon checked twice. Diana had called in a favor. Webb was Maricopa County's lead investigator for elder abuse cases, and he'd been following the Hartley file since our criminal complaint landed on his desk. You sure about this? My son invited me to a private meeting the night before a guardianship hearing that would give him control of my entire estate. He specified alone. I checked the recording device taped beneath my shirt. He's not planning a reconciliation. Wire's hot. We've got units on the perimeter. If anything goes sideways, it won't. Gavin's not violent. He's times calculated asterisk. Whatever he's planning tonight is designed to look like something else. Webb nodded slowly. Staged accident. Medical emergency. Something that supports the incompetence narrative. Exactly. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house where I'd once taught my son to ride a bicycle. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into darkness. The air smelled wrong, stale, chemical, with an undertone of something sweet I couldn't identify. My hand found the light switch instinctively, but nothing happened. Gavin? In here, Dad. His voice came from the living room. Don't turn on the lights. The bulbs burned out. I've been meaning to fix them. I moved forward carefully, my eyes adjusting. The living room took shape in shadows. The couch where Maggie used to read. The fireplace we'd never used. The windows overlooking the backyard where Scout had once chased rabbits. Gavin sat in my armchair times my times chair, the leather recliner Maggie had bought me for our 30th anniversary. Nicole stood behind him, her phone's flashlight casting harsh shadows across her face. Thanks for coming. Gavin gestured to the couch. Sit down. Please. I remained standing. Say what you need to say, Dad. He ran his hands through his hair. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him. Really seen him, without the chemical fog. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements jerky. This whole thing has gotten out of control. The lawyers, the court filings, the police, none of this is what I wanted. What did you want, Gavin? I wanted to times help times you. He leaned forward, and even in the darkness I could see the rehearsed sincerity. You've been declining for months, forgetting things, confused. Mom would have wanted me to step in, to protect you from yourself. Your mother would have wanted you to drug me with diphenhydramine for 4 months? The silence stretched. Nicole's flashlight wavered. I don't know what you're talking about, Gavin said carefully. The tea, Gavin. Nicole's special herbal tea. 50 milligrams of diphenhydramine per serving, administered daily since July. Enough to cause confusion, memory impairment, and documented cognitive decline, the exact symptoms you cited in your guardianship petition. That's insane. You're paranoid. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I have the pharmacy records, the toxicology report, the telehealth prescription from a Dr. Robert Callahan who, interestingly, has never met me in person. I took a step forward. I have the Project Legacy folder, Gavin. All of it. The guardianship documents, the liquidation spreadsheets, the life insurance policy with the incapacitation clause. Nicole's flashlight dropped. In the sudden darkness, I heard her whisper, Gavin, he knows. He knows everything. Shut up. He has the files. How does he have the files? I said times shut up, asterisk. I kept my voice level, my words clear, every syllable captured by the wire beneath my shirt. Here's what I think happened. You started stealing from me in February 2023, small amounts at first, testing whether I'd notice. When I didn't question the withdrawals, you escalated. By summer, you were in too deep, the cryptocurrency losses, the mounting debts, and you needed a way out. Nicole suggested the guardianship. Get me, declared incompetent, take control of the assets, liquidate everything to cover your losses. But you needed me impaired first. You needed documentation of decline, so you drugged me. I was close enough now to see his face clearly. Your own father, Gavin. You poisoned me for 4 months so you could steal my home. It wasn't supposed to be like this. His voice cracked. The money, I made some bad investments. The people I owe, they're not patient. Dad, I was trying to protect you. If I could just get control of the accounts, pay off the debts, everything would go back to normal. By killing me? Asterisk. No asterisk. He stood abruptly. That's not. I would never. The life insurance policy disagrees. $500,000, payable upon death times or permanent incapacitation, asterisk. Once you had guardianship, you could move me to any facility you wanted. Somewhere the documentation could be managed. Nicole stepped forward. Gavin, we need to leave. Now. You're not going anywhere. I pulled out my phone, illuminating the room. Detective Webb, you can come in now. The front door opened. Webb entered with 2 uniformed officers, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Gavin's face went white. Gavin Hartley, Nicole Price. Webb's voice was flat, professional. You're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Nicole started screaming, a high, keening sound that echoed off the walls. Gavin just stood there, frozen, staring at me as the officers approached. Dad, he whispered. Please. I thought about Maggie. About the years I'd spent building something to leave behind. About the son I'd raised and the monster he'd become. You should have asked for help, I said. You should have told me the truth. Would you have given me the money? The question hung in the air. No, I admitted. But I would have helped you find another way. I would have loved you through it. The officers led him out in handcuffs, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Nicole followed, still screaming about lawyers and rights and mistakes. I stood alone in my dark house, surrounded by the ruins of my family, and waited for my heart to break. It didn't. The The Maricopa County Superior Court smelled like floor wax in desperation. I arrived at 7:45 a.m. on November 18th, 15 minutes before the doors opened, wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to Maggie's funeral. Diana walked beside me, her heels clicking against marble, a leather briefcase stuffed with 18 months of evidence. Behind us came Thomas Brennan, Margaret Chen, and Dr. Yamamoto, my fortress of witnesses, assembled to defend a mind my own son had tried to steal. "How are you feeling?" Diana asked, like a man about to watch his family publicly dismembered. "That's accurate." The courtroom filled slowly. Reporters claimed the back row's word had spread about the arrest, and the story had all the elements the media loved. Wealth, betrayal, poison, a father versus son. I recognized a producer from a true crime podcast setting up a recorder. By noon, my private tragedy would be public entertainment. Gavin entered through a side door, flanked by his court-appointed attorney. He'd been denied bail flight risk. The judge had ruled, given the cryptocurrency accounts and potential for asset concealment. He wore an orange jumpsuit now, his wrists cuffed to a chain around his waist. The confident son who'd handed me a dog bowl 3 days ago had vanished, replaced by something hollow and diminished. Nicole wasn't present. Her attorney had requested a separate hearing, and she was reportedly negotiating a cooperation agreement. The rats were already fleeing. Judge Catherine Aldridge took her seat at precisely 9 a.m. She was 63, silver-haired, with a reputation for methodical analysis and zero tolerance for courtroom theater. Diana had called her the best possible draw. This court is convened to hear the guardianship petition filed by Gavin Michael Hartley regarding his father, Edmund James Hartley. Judge Aldridge's voice carried without amplification. "I understand there have been significant developments since the original filing. Counsel, please, approach." The sidebar lasted 12 minutes. I watched Gavin's attorney, a young public defender named Rodriguez, who clearly wished he were anywhere else, gesture emphatically, while Diana responded with calm, surgical precision. When they returned, Rodriguez looked like a man who'd just learned his parachute was a backpack. "The court has been informed of criminal charges filed against the petitioner," Judge Aldridge announced. "These charges include elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The respondent has filed a counter-motion to dismiss the guardianship petition and has submitted extensive documentation challenging the petition's factual basis." She turned to Gavin's side of the room. "Mr. Rodriguez, does your client wish to proceed with the guardianship petition given these circumstances?" Rodriguez stood slowly. "Your Honor, my client maintains that his concerns about his father's cognitive state are genuine and, let me rephrase." The judge's tone sharpened. "Does your client wish to argue, under oath, that his father is mentally incompetent, while simultaneously facing charges that he times chemically induced times that apparent incompetence through sustained drugging?" The courtroom went silent. "Your Honor," Rodriguez tried again, "my client's position is that I withdraw the petition." Every head turned. Gavin had spoken directly, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. "Mr. Hartley, you understand this withdrawal is on the record, and you understand this does not affect the criminal proceedings against you?" Judge Aldridge made a note. "The guardianship petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice. The respondent's counter-motion is granted." She looked at me for the first time. "Mr. Hartley, the elder Mr. Hartley, this court finds no evidence of cognitive impairment requiring guardianship intervention. You retain full legal control of your person and assets." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "However," the judge's voice hardened, "I've reviewed the submitted evidence, and I'm deeply troubled by what I've seen. The systematic drugging of an elderly parent, the financial exploitation spanning 18 months, the apparent conspiracy to manufacture legal grounds for asset seizure. Hartley, if these allegations are proven in criminal court, you will have committed one of the most calculated betrayals I've encountered in 30 years on the bench." Gavin said nothing. This court will provide full cooperation to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. All submitted evidence will be transferred to the criminal investigation. Bailiff, please return the defendant to custody. As they led Gavin past my row, he stopped. The bailiff tensed, but Gavin made no aggressive move. He simply looked at me. Really looked. Perhaps for the first time since Maggie died. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words. 5 years too late. "I know," I replied. "But sorry doesn't give me back my son." They took him away. The courtroom began to empty. Thomas Brennan clapped a hand on my shoulder. Margaret Chen was crying quietly into a tissue. "Doctor," Yamamoto nodded once a physician's acknowledgement that the patient had survived. Diana gathered her files. "That's it. It's over." "No." I watched the door through which they'd led my son. "It's just beginning." Outside the courthouse, the November sun felt foreign on my skin. I'd spent so many months in chemical twilight that ordinary daylight seemed like a gift I didn't deserve. "Mr. Hartley?" A woman approached mid-40s, professional suit, a notebook in her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen, Arizona Republic. Would you be willing to comment on today's proceedings?" "No comment." "Sir, your story could help other families. Elder financial abuse affects millions." I stopped walking. Asterisk. Elder financial abuse affects millions. Asterisk. The same words Dr. Yamamoto had used. The same statistics I'd seen in my FBI days, when we'd investigated nursing home fraud and inheritance schemes. "How many?" I asked. "Excuse me? How many elderly victims in Arizona alone? How many cases like mine?" Sarah Chen flipped through her notebook. According to Adult Protective Services, approximately 14,000 reports annually. Financial exploitation is the most common form. Most cases go unreported because the perpetrators are family members. 14,000. And I had nearly been one of them. "Give me your card," I said. "I may have something to say." Diana's office became my second home. For the next 3 weeks, we dismantled my son's financial crimes with the same precision I'd once applied to corporate fraud investigations. Every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every cryptocurrency transaction, we documented it all, building a restitution case that would follow Gavin for the rest of his life. Final tally. Diana announced on December 9th, sliding a spreadsheet across her conference table. Direct theft through wire transfers, $163,247. Credit card fraud, $47,000. Cryptocurrency mining, electricity theft, $4,320. Jewelry and personal items sold without authorization, quote, $11,200. Total documented losses, $225,767. I studied the numbers. Each one represented a moment of trust betrayed a phone call where I'd believed my son's lies, a signature I'd provided while chemically impaired, a family heirloom converted to cash for gambling debts. There's also the life insurance policy, Diana continued. You've been paying premiums of $400 monthly for 18 months. That's $7,200 funding your own potential murder. Add it to the total, $232,967. She set down her pen. Edmund, realistically, Gavin doesn't have this money. His cryptocurrency accounts are frozen at approximately $12,000. His checking account holds $847. His only asset of value is a 2019 Honda Civic, worth maybe $15,000. I'm aware. So what's the goal here? He can't pay restitution he doesn't have. I leaned back in my chair. Through Diana's window, Scottsdale sparkled in the December sun, a city of golf courses and shopping centers, of retirement communities where people like me were supposed to spend their final years in peace. The goal, I said slowly. There's a difference. Revenge would be demanding full payment immediately, forcing him into bankruptcy, ensuring he never recovers. Accountability means He spends the next 15 years remembering what he did every month, every payment, every time he writes a check to the father he tried to kill. Diana studied me for a long moment. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else. The restitution agreement took shape over the following week. I structured it like a loan, the kind of loan a father might give a son who'd made honest mistakes. Except, this son had tried to murder me, so the terms reflected that reality. Principal amount, $232,967. Interest rate, 0. Payment period, 15 years. Monthly payment, $1,294.26, with adjustments permitted for documented financial hardship. Collateral, none, because there was nothing left to take. Enforcement mechanism, court-ordered wage garnishment, if payments lapsed for more than 60 days. This is remarkably generous, Diana observed, reviewing the draft. Most victims in your position would demand immediate asset seizure, prison restitution programs, the works. Most victims aren't trying to teach their sons how to be human. You think this will teach him? I thought about Gavin at 8 years old, crying because he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. I'd made him work odd jobs for 2 months to pay for the replacement, mowing lawns, washing cars, walking dogs. By the time he'd earned the $87, he understood something about consequences that no lecture could have conveyed. I think it's his last chance to learn, I said. Whether he takes it is up to him. The meeting took place in the Maricopa County Jail's legal visitation room. Gavin sat across from me, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the beige walls. His attorney, a new one, privately retained after Nicole's parents posted partial bail, shuffled papers nervously. Diana sat beside me. The restitution agreement between us. You want me to sign this? Gavin asked, his voice flat. I want you to read it first. He picked up the document. I watched his eyes move across the pages, the itemized theft, the payment schedule, the 15-year term. When he reached the final page, he stopped. There's a clause here, he said slowly. Section 7.3. Successful completion of the restitution program, combined with demonstrated rehabilitation, may result in the restoration of limited inheritance rights at the sole discretion of Edmund J. Hartley. Keep reading. Such restoration would not exceed 10% of the estate value at the time of Edmund J. Hartley's death and would be contingent upon. He looked up. Contingent upon the establishment of a genuine, sustained relationship between the parties, as determined by independent evaluation. The room was silent. You're leaving me a door, Gavin whispered. I'm leaving you a window. A small one. 15 years from now, if you've paid every dollar, if you've rebuilt yourself into someone your mother would have recognized, if you've proven that the son I raised still exists somewhere inside the man who tried to kill me, then maybe, maybe, Gavin's hands trembled. Why? Because your mother asked me to. The words hung in the air. Maggie, 5 years gone, still shaping the boundaries of my mercy. She knew. I continued. At the end, when the cancer had taken almost everything, she told me she was worried about you, about the choices you were making, the people you were becoming. She asked me to promise that I would never give up on you completely. I paused. I've broken a lot of promises in my life, Gavin. I won't break that one. He signed the agreement without another word. The criminal trial began on a Monday in March. 6 months had passed since that night in my living room. 6 months of depositions, evidence reviews, and sleepless nights spent wondering how I'd raised a son capable of such calculated cruelty. The Maricopa County Courthouse had become familiar territory, its marble hallways and fluorescent lighting etched into my memory like the floor plan of a prison. I took my seat in the gallery at 8:47 a.m., flanked by Diana on one side and Thomas Brennan on the other. The prosecution had asked me to attend every day. My presence, they said, would remind the jury that this wasn't an abstract financial crime. There was a victim, a father, a 72-year-old man who'd nearly died because his son needed gambling money. Gavin entered through the defendant's door, wearing a suit I recognized charcoal gray, the one I'd bought him for his college graduation. He'd lost more weight, his cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. When he saw me in the gallery, he looked away. Nicole sat at a separate table with her own attorney. She'd taken the cooperation deal, full testimony against Gavin, in exchange for reduced charges. Her sentencing would come later, but the prosecutor had hinted at 5 to 7 years. She'd serve her time and emerge in her late 30s, still young enough to rebuild a life from the wreckage. Gavin had no such option. He'd rejected every plea deal, insisting on trial, convinced that a jury would see nuance where the evidence showed only malice. He was wrong. Prosecutor Amanda Reyes built her case like a cathedral foundation first, then walls, then spire. Day one established the relationship. Father and son, a $720,000 home in Paradise Valley, a lifetime of support and opportunity that Gavin had repaid with poison. She introduced photographs of family gatherings, report cards I'd saved, the college tuition receipts I'd kept in a file labeled Gavin's future. Edmund Hartley gave his son everything, she told the jury. And his son decided it wasn't enough. Day two brought the financial evidence. Agent Marcus Webb walked the jury through 18 months of theft, the wire transfers, the credit card fraud, the cryptocurrency mining, the jewelry sales. Each transaction appeared on a timeline projected on the courtroom screen. Red dots multiplying like a disease spreading through my accounts. $232,967, Webb concluded. Stolen systematically from a man who trusted his son implicitly. Day 3 introduced the drugging. Dr. Yamamoto explained diphenhydramine toxicity in terms the jury could understand. Confusion, memory loss, impaired judgment. She displayed my toxicology results, the pharmacy records, the telehealth prescriptions obtained through fraud. The defendant's father was chemically incapacitated for approximately 127 days, she testified. Long enough to manufacture the appearance of cognitive decline. Long enough to nearly destroy his kidneys. Long enough to kill him. If the dosing had continued another 4 to 6 weeks, I watched the jury during her testimony. A woman in the front row, mid-50s, gray hair, wedding ring pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in the back closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. They understood. They times felt, times it. Day 4 belonged to Nicole. She took the stand in a navy dress. Her hair pulled back, her makeup minimal. The transformation from fitness influencer to cooperating witness was complete. No filters, no poses, just a woman trying to salvage what remained of her future. Whose idea was the guardianship? Prosecutor Reyes asked. Mine. Nicole's voice was steady, rehearsed. I researched Arizona law. I found the telehealth service that would prescribe without examination. I calculated the dosing schedule. And the life insurance policy? Gavin's idea. He said his father's death would solve everything, pay off the debts, fund our future. I told him death was too risky, too investigated. Incapacitation was safer. Incapacitation through guardianship? Yes. Once we had legal control, we could move him to a facility, adjust his medications, let nature take its course. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Did you discuss this plan with the defendant? Many times. He was hesitant at first, said it was his father, said there had to be another way. But the loan sharks were threatening him. The debts were mounting. By October, he agreed to everything, including his father's death. Nicole paused. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, perhaps, or the memory of who she'd been before the money ran out. He said he didn't want him to suffer. He asked me to make sure it was peaceful, like falling asleep. I felt Thomas's hand on my arm, steadying me. The woman in the front row was crying now. No further questions. The defense tried. God knows, they tried. Gavin's attorney, a veteran criminal defender named Harrison Burke, painted a picture of a desperate man manipulated by a cunning woman. He emphasized the gambling addiction, the loan shark threats, the psychological pressure. He called character witnesses who described Gavin as kind, generous, fundamentally good. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings from my living room, the project legacy files, the pharmacy records, the life insurance policy with its incapacitation clause. On day 7, Gavin took the stand in his own defense. It was a mistake. Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Reyes dismantled him piece by piece. She showed him the text messages where he'd discussed dosing schedules. She played the audio where he'd agreed the old man needed to go. She displayed the spreadsheet where he'd calculated how long I needed to survive after guardianship to avoid suspicion. "You planned to kill your father," she said, her voice quiet but carrying through the silent courtroom. Not in a moment of passion. Not in self-defense. "You planned it for 18 months. With spreadsheets and timelines and pharmaceutical calculations." Gavin broke. "I didn't want to," he sobbed. "I loved him. I still love him. But the money, the debts, I couldn't see any other way out." "There were other ways, Mr. Hartley. You could have asked for help. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have faced your mistakes like a man instead of poisoning your father like a coward." Objection. Withdrawn. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 3 weeks later, I returned to watch my son learn how long he would spend in prison. The sentencing hearing drew a smaller crowd. Than the trial, the media had moved on to fresher tragedies, and the gallery held only the dedicated. Diana, Thomas, Rosa Delgado, and a handful of reporters still mining the story for content. I sat in the same seat I'd occupied throughout the trial, wearing the same navy suit, feeling like a man attending his own funeral. Judge Catherine Aldridge presided again, her silver hair pulled back severely, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the pre-sentencing report. I'd submitted a victim impact statement, 4 pages, describing what it felt like to be poisoned by your own child. To watch your memories dissolve into chemical fog, to realize that the son you'd raised had calculated your death like a business expense. Writing it had taken 3 days. I'd cried through most of it. "Before I proceed with sentencing," Judge Aldridge began, "the court will hear statements from the victim and the defendant. Mr. Hartley, the elder Mr. Hartley, you may approach." I walked to the podium on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. The microphone hummed softly. Behind me, I could feel Gavin's eyes on my back, the same eyes that had watched me drink poisoned tea for 127 days. "Your Honor," I began, "I've spent 40 years investigating financial crimes. I've seen greed destroy families, ambition corrupt good people, and desperation drive otherwise decent men to terrible choices. I thought I understood betrayal." I paused. The courtroom was silent. I didn't. Not until my own son decided I was worth more dead than alive. The words came easier now, flowing from the place where I'd stored them during months of sleepless nights. Gavin didn't steal money from a stranger. He didn't poison a business rival. He targeted his father, the man who taught him to ride a bicycle, who paid for his education, who stood beside him at his wedding. He looked at me and saw an obstacle, a balance sheet, a problem to be solved with antifreeze and legal paperwork. I turned to face Gavin directly. He was crying, silent tears streaming down a face I'd loved for 36 years. "I don't hate you," I said. "I wish I could. Hate would be simpler than this. This time's grief. Times for a son who's still alive but lost to me forever. I grieve for the boy you were, Gavin, for the man you could have become, for the grandchildren I'll never hold because their father will spend their childhood behind bars." My voice cracked. I steadied myself against the podium. The prosecutor asked me what sentence I wanted. I told her I wanted my son back, the real one, the one who existed before the gambling and the debts, and the woman who taught him that murder was a financial strategy. But that son is gone. Maybe he never existed at all. Maybe I just wanted to believe he did. I looked at Judge Aldridge. I ask the court to impose whatever sentence justice requires. Not for revenge, not for closure, but because accountability is the only gift I have left to give him, the only lesson I can still teach. I returned to my seat. Rosa Delgado pressed a tissue into my hand. Gavin's statement was shorter. He stood at the podium in his orange jumpsuit, his attorney beside him, his hands trembling against the wood. "Dad, His voice broke. He tried again. "I know. Sorry isn't enough. I know nothing I say can undo what I did. But I need you to know that I remember." He looked directly at me. "I remember you teaching me to throw a baseball in the backyard. I remember you staying up all night when I had pneumonia in 3rd grade. I remember you crying at Mom's funeral, trying to be strong for me even though you were falling apart." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't know when I became someone who could hurt you. I've tried to find the moment, the decision, the turning point, but it wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 small choices, each one making the next one easier, until poisoning my own father felt like just another item on a to-do list." His voice hardened. "Nicole didn't make me do this. The loan sharks didn't make me do this. I made these choices. I signed the documents. I watched you drink that tea every morning and told myself it was necessary. That's not desperation. That's something broken inside me that I don't know how to fix." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I deserve whatever sentence you impose. My father taught me that actions have consequences. I finally understand what he meant." Judge Aldridge removed her glasses and studied both of us for a long moment. In 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a case that disturbed me as deeply as this one. The systematic nature of the crime, the exploitation of trust, the calculated attempt to use our legal system as a weapon against a vulnerable victim. She turned to Gavin. "Mr. Hartley, you are not a victim of circumstance. You are not a desperate man who made a single terrible choice. You are someone who spent 18 months planning to kill his father for money, and who would have succeeded if not for the intervention of a loyal housekeeper." Her voice carried the weight of judgment. "For the charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, 20 years. For attempted murder, 15 years. To run consecutively. For elder abuse, 10 years. Concurrent. For wire fraud, 5 years. Concurrent. For money laundering, 5 years. Concurrent." She paused. "Total sentence, 35 years in the Arizona State Prison System, with possibility of parole after 25 years. Gavin's knees buckled. His attorney caught him. "This court is adjourned." The house felt different now. I stood in my living room on a Thursday afternoon in late April, surrounded by the same furniture, the same photographs, the same walls that had witnessed my poisoning, and none of it felt like home anymore. The leather armchair, where Gavin had sat during our confrontation, the dining table where Nicole had served me poisoned tea, the kitchen where Rosa had found the unlabeled bottle. Every room held a memory I wanted to forget. "You don't have to stay here," Diana said. She'd stopped by to deliver the final paperwork, asset recovery documents, insurance cancellations, the official closure of a nightmare that had consumed 6 months of my life. "The market's strong. You could sell, relocate, start fresh." Maggie loved this house. Maggie's been gone 5 years, Edmund. And the man who lived here with her, that man doesn't exist anymore either. She wasn't wrong. The Edmund Hartley, who'd built a career at the FBI, who'd raised a son in these rooms, who'd buried his wife and thought his greatest challenges were behind him, that man had died somewhere between the first poisoned cup of tea and the moment Rosa whispered, "Times don't drink it, asterisk." The man who remained was someone else entirely. I spent the next week sorting through decades of accumulated life. Maggie's clothes, still hanging in our closet because I'd never found the courage to donate them. Gavin's childhood bedroom, preserved like a museum exhibit, baseball trophies, honor roll certificates, photographs of a boy who no longer existed. The home office where I'd built my career, now filled with evidence boxes and legal documents instead of case files and commendations. Rosa helped. She'd returned the day after the sentencing, refusing payment, insisting she owed me for the false accusation Gavin had manufactured. "You owe me nothing," I told her. "You saved my life. Then let me help you save the rest of it." Together, we created 3 piles: keep, donate, destroy. The keep pile was smallest Maggie's jewelry, our wedding album, a few photographs from before everything went wrong. The donate pile filled the garage. The destroy pile went into a bonfire in the backyard, flames consuming 18 months of poisoned memories. I watched Gavin's childhood drawings curl and blacken in the fire, the refrigerator art I'd saved for 30 years, the Father's Day cards with their crayon hearts and misspelled messages. Asterisk, "I love you, Daddy. You're the best." Asterisk. Rosa stood beside me, silent, as I let go of a son I would never hold again. The decision to sell came easier than I expected. By May, the house was on the market. By June, it had sold $695,000, slightly below asking, to a young couple expecting their first child. I watched them walk through the rooms during the final inspection, their hands intertwined, their faces bright with the same hope Maggie and I had felt 40 years ago. "This is the nursery," the wife said, standing in what had been Gavin's room. "Perfect light. We'll paint it yellow." I didn't tell them what had happened here. Some ghosts deserve to rest. The new apartment was modest by comparison. A 2-bedroom unit in a Scottsdale high-rise, 12 floors above street level, with views of Camelback Mountain and no memories at all. I moved in with 3 suitcases, a box of photographs, and Rosa's promise to visit every Thursday. "It's small," she observed, surveying the empty rooms. "It's enough. What will you do now? You can't just sit here and stare at mountains." I walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in this city, 14,000 elderly people were being exploited by people they trusted. Somewhere, another father was drinking tea, prepared by a child who wanted him dead. I've been thinking about what the reporter said. At the courthouse, after the guardianship hearing, "The woman who wanted your story?" She said, "Elder financial abuse affects millions. That most cases go unreported because the perpetrators are family members." Rosa joined me at the window. "You want to tell your story? I want to do more than that." I turned to face her. "I want to help other people survive theirs." The idea had been growing since that day, on the courthouse steps, a seed planted by a statistic, nurtured by 6 months of watching the system struggle to protect people like me. I'd spent 40 years investigating financial crimes for the government. Now I would spend whatever time I had left fighting for the victims. "A foundation," I said slowly. "Education, intervention, advocacy. Something that takes what happened to me and turns it into protection for others." Rosa's eyes glistened. "Maggie would be proud. Maggie would tell me I should have done it years ago." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "Let's get started." The call came on a Tuesday morning in July. I was sitting in my new apartment, surrounded by legal pads covered in foundation planning notes, when my phone displayed an unfamiliar Phoenix number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Telemarketers had discovered my new address, but something made me answer. "Mr. Hartley?" "Edmund Hartley." The voice was female, hesitant, with the particular tremor of someone working up courage. "Speaking. My name is Dorothy Chen. I read about your case in the Republic. The article about what your son did." A long pause. "I think the same thing is happening to me." I set down my coffee. "Tell me everything." Dorothy Chen was 78 years old. She'd been a high school English teacher for 42 years before retiring to a modest home in Mesa. Her husband had died in 2019, leaving her with a paid-off house, a small pension, and a granddaughter named Ashley, who'd moved in to help with expenses. "Ashley was always my favorite," Dorothy said. "We'd met at a coffee shop near her home neutral territory," she'd insisted, "because Ashley monitored the house. She used to write me poetry for my birthday. Called me every Sunday, even from college." When she offered to move in after Richard died, I thought it was a blessing. When did things change? Gradually. First, she took over the bills, said I was forgetting to pay them, that my credit was suffering. Then she convinced me to add her to my bank accounts. For convenience, she said, in case of emergency. The pattern was achingly familiar. I'd seen it in federal case files. I'd lived it in my own kitchen. How much is missing? Dorothy's hands trembled around her coffee cup. I'm not sure. She handles everything now. But last month, I tried to buy groceries, and my card was declined. When I called the bank, they said my checking account had $47. I had over $80,000 in savings when Ashley moved in. That was 3 years ago? 3 years. Her eyes filled with tears. I keep thinking I must be mistaken, that I'm getting confused, forgetting things. Ashley says I have early dementia. She's been giving me vitamins, special supplements to help my memory. My blood ran cold. Vitamins. What do they look like? Pink capsules. She orders them online. Mrs. Chen, I need you to do something for me. Tonight, when Ashley gives you those vitamins, don't take them, hide them. Bring them to me tomorrow, and we'll have them tested. You think she's... I think your story sounds exactly like mine sounded 6 months ago. The lab results came back in 72 hours. The memory vitamins contained diphenhydramine, the same sedative Nicole had used on me. Lower doses, designed for longer-term administration. But the effect was identical. Manufactured confusion, induced memory loss, chemical validation of a dementia diagnosis that didn't exist. I called Detective Marcus Webb. Another one? His voice carried a weariness I recognized. Same playbook. Family member moves in, takes over finances, drugs the victim to simulate cognitive decline. The only difference is the relationship granddaughter instead of son. The Chen case. I've heard whispers. APS has been circling, but they don't have enough for intervention. They do now. I have the lab results, and Mrs. Chen is willing to testify. Webb was silent for a moment. Edmund, this is the third case you've brought me in 6 weeks. The Delacroix family in Tempe. The Morrison situation in Chandler. Now this. I know. You're building something, aren't you? This isn't just personal advocacy. I looked at the whiteboard I'd installed in my apartment, a web of names, addresses, and case summaries spreading across its surface like a neural network of exploitation. I'm building a database. Every case I hear about, every pattern I identify, every connection between perpetrators and methods. The individual crimes look isolated, but when you map them together, what do you see? I see an epidemic. I see thousands of victims who don't know they're being victimized. And I see an opportunity to do something about it. By August, my network had grown beyond anything I'd anticipated. Thomas Brennan connected me with retired FBI analysts who volunteered to review financial patterns. Dr. Yamamoto introduced me to geriatricians concerned about patients whose dementia symptoms didn't match organic presentations. Rosa spread the word through her church community. And suddenly, I was receiving calls from housekeepers, caregivers, and neighbors who'd witnessed suspicious behavior, but didn't know who to tell. Diana helped me establish the legal framework, a nonprofit structure that would allow us to receive donations, hire staff, and operate as a legitimate advocacy organization. We filed the paperwork on August 15th, exactly 9 months after Rosa had whispered those 4 words that saved my life. The Hartley Foundation for Elder Protection. Terrible name, Thomas observed, reviewing the incorporation documents. Sounds like you're protecting elders from Hartleys. We are. In a way. Protecting them from people like my son. The phone rang. Another case. Another family discovering that love and betrayal wore the same face. Hartley Foundation. I answered. How can I help? The whiteboard in my apartment had become a constellation of suffering. By September, I'd mapped 47 cases across Maricopa County, red pins for confirmed exploitation, yellow for suspected, blue for resolved. Lines connected perpetrators who used similar methods. The telehealth prescription scam appeared in 11 cases. The memory vitamin drugging in 7. The guardianship to liquidation pipeline in at least 15. But it was the cluster in the northeast corner that kept me awake at night. 5 cases. 5 elderly victims. 5 different family perpetrators. And one common thread I almost missed. All 5 had attended the same financial wellness seminar at a community center in Scottsdale, within 6 months of the exploitation beginning. That's not coincidence, Thomas Brennan said, studying the pattern over my shoulder. That's recruitment, or training. I pulled the seminar flyers from my evidence box. Glossy trifolds, promising protecting your golden years, estate planning for seniors. The presenter was listed as Heritage Financial Solutions, a company that existed only as a P. box and a website full of stock photographs. Someone is teaching people how to exploit their elderly relatives, I said slowly, packaging it as legitimate financial planning and charging for the privilege. I'd bet. Detective Webb obtained the seminar registration records through a subpoena. The list contained 342 names, spanning 2 years of monthly presentations. Cross-referencing against Adult Protective Services reports revealed a disturbing correlation. 23 attendees had elderly family members who'd filed exploitation complaints within 18 months of the seminar. Another 31 had family members who died under natural circumstances shortly after significant asset transfers. 54 potential victims from a single source, Webb said, his voice grim. Who runs it? The company's registered to a Miranda Castellano. The name hit me like a physical blow. Miranda Castellano, the birth name Nicole had used before changing it in 2016. The same Nicole who was currently serving 5 years in state prison for her role in poisoning me. She's not the mastermind, I said. She's a graduate. Someone taught her these methods, and she's been passing them on. Through the seminars? Through the seminars? Think about it. She identifies families with vulnerable elders and greedy heirs. She teaches them the playbook. Financial takeover, medical gaslighting, guardianship fraud. She probably takes a percentage of the proceeds. Webb whistled low. A pyramid scheme for elder abuse. Worse. The FBI got involved the following week. Special Agent Rita Vasquez flew in from the Phoenix field office, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in elder fraud networks. She reviewed my whiteboard, my case files, and my correlation analysis with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen patterns like this before. You've built a better intelligence map than most of my analysts could manage, she observed. Where'd you learn this? 34 years in the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. White-collar fraud, money laundering, RICO cases. Edmund Hartley. Recognition flickered in her eyes. The Pemberton case. The Axiom Pharmaceutical investigation. You were a legend before you retired. I was a bureaucrat who got lucky. Now I'm a victim who got smart. Vasquez sat down across from me. Mr. Hartley, what you've uncovered isn't just a local exploitation ring. The Heritage Financial Solutions model has appeared in 7 states over the past 4 years. Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Texas, California, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Always targeting retirement communities. Always the same methodology. Someone's scaling it. Someone's industrializing times it. We've been trying to identify the central organizer for 18 months. You're Nicole, your son's wife. She's just a regional operator. There's someone above her. Someone who built the curriculum, established the franchise model, and is collecting payments from every graduate who successfully liquidates an elderly victim. I stared at my whiteboard 47 pins that suddenly represented something much larger than Maricopa County. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $50 million annually, across all known operations. Real number could be 3 times that. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about my son. Gavin hadn't invented this scheme. He'd been recruited into it by Nicole, who'd been trained by someone else, who'd learned from someone above them. A pyramid of predators, each level teaching the next how to strip their parents of everything they'd built. My son was guilty. That hadn't changed. He'd made his choices, signed his documents, watched me drink poison every morning. But he was also a symptom of something larger, a system designed to identify vulnerable families and weaponize their dysfunction. Nicole hadn't seduced him randomly. She'd time-selected times him. She'd seen our family dynamics, identified his insecurities, calculated that a son desperate for his father's approval could be manipulated into patricide. I wondered how many other Gavins existed out there. How many sons and daughters were being groomed right now, their financial desperation and emotional wounds transformed into tools for elder exploitation. The phone rang. "Agent Vasquez, we're forming a task force," she said. "Multi-state, multi-agency. We want you as a civilian consultant, your investigative experience, your victim perspective, your network of sources. What's the target? We're calling it Operation Golden Shield. The goal is to identify and dismantle the entire Heritage financial network, from the regional operators to whoever's running the whole thing." I looked at my whiteboard. 47 cases in one county, hundreds more across the country, thousands of families destroyed by a system designed for destruction. When do we start? I visited my son in prison for the first time since sentencing. The Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence sat in the desert like a concrete tumor. Guard towers, razor wire, and endless beige walls baking under the October sun. I'd driven 90 minutes through empty highway to reach it, rehearsing what I would say, knowing that no rehearsal could prepare me for what I needed to ask. Gavin was brought to the visitation room in shackles. 6 months in prison had aged him a decade. His hair had grayed at the temples. His cheeks had hollowed, and his eyes held a flatness I'd seen in career criminals during my bureau days, the look of someone who'd stopped expecting anything good. He sat across from me at a metal table bolted to the floor, his hands folded, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "Dad." His voice was hoarse. "I didn't think you'd come. I need to ask you something." "About Nicole." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "What about her?" "The Heritage Financial Seminars. The Financial Wellnesses presentations at community centers. Did you know she was involved?" Gavin's expression shifted surprise, then something darker. "Fear. How do you know about that?" "I know about a lot of things now. I know Nicole's real name is Miranda Castellano. I know she's been training people to exploit elderly relatives for at least 4 years. I know there's a network spanning 7 states, and I know she's not the one running it." I leaned forward. "What I don't know is how much you knew, and whether you can help me stop it." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Gavin stared at the table, his shackled hands trembling slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She brought me to one of the seminars, about a year before, before everything. Said it was a financial planning workshop, that we could learn how to help you manage your money as you got older. But that's not what it was. No." He closed his eyes. "It was a training session. How to identify high-value targets, that's what they called them. How to establish financial control gradually. How to document cognitive decline, real or manufactured. How to use the legal system to complete the transfer. The guardianship playbook. They had case studies, Dad. Success stories. People who'd liquidated their parents' estates, paid off debts, started new lives. They made it sound normal, like everyone did it. Like we were just being smart about inheritance, instead of waiting for it." My stomach turned. "And you didn't walk out?" Gavin's eyes opened, glistening with something that might have been shame. "I was $300,000 in debt to people who'd threatened to break my legs. Nicole said this was the only way. She said you'd never notice. That you were already showing signs of decline. That it would be a mercy to take control before you made bad decisions with the money. A mercy. That's what she called it. A mercy." I forced myself to breathe, to remember why I was here. The person running the network. "Did you ever meet them?" Gavin shook his head. "Nicole handled all of that, but she talked about someone called them the architect. She said the architect had built the system, trained the trainers, took a percentage of every successful transition. Transition. That's what they call it when someone steals their parents' life savings, or when they die. The architect apparently has a different fee structure for accelerated transitions. The clinical terminology made my skin crawl. They'd built a business model around patricide. Did Nicole ever mention names? Locations? Anything that could identify this person? Once. Gavin frowned, searching his memory. She got a phone call about 8 months before everything happened. Afterward, she was rattled. I'd never seen her like that. She said the architect was coming to Phoenix for regional review. She spent 2 weeks preparing documentation, financial reports, like she was presenting to a board of directors. Did you see the architect? No. Nicole went alone to the meeting, but when she came back, she had cash. A lot of it, maybe $40,000. She said it was her performance bonuses for the quarter. $40,000. A bounty for teaching people to destroy their families. I sat back in my chair, processing everything. My son had attended training sessions on how to exploit me. He'd learned the methodology, understood the system, participated willingly in his own corruption. The gambling debts had made him desperate, but the seminars had made him capable. And somewhere, someone called the architect was collecting fees on the destruction of thousands of families. Gavin, I need you to tell the FBI everything you know. Every detail about the seminars, the training materials, Nicole's contacts, everything. Why would I do that? I'm already serving 35 years. Cooperation won't change my sentence. Maybe not. But it might stop someone else's son from doing what you did. He flinched as if I'd struck him. You think I don't regret it? You think I don't lie awake every night remembering what I did to you? I poisoned my own father. Dad, I watched you get confused and sick, and I told myself it was the drugs, not the guilt, that made me feel like dying. Then do something with that guilt. Use it. Help me tear down the system that made you into this. Help me find the architect and burn their network to the ground. It won't undo what you did, nothing will. But it might mean something. It might mean your mother's death didn't produce a monster for nothing. Gavin was crying, now ugly, heaving sobs that shook his entire frame. The guard by the door shifted uncomfortably, but didn't intervene. I'll tell them everything. Gavin choked out. Every seminar, every technique, every person Nicole mentioned. All of it. I reached across the table, and, for the first time in over a year, that's a start. The FBI debriefing lasted 11 hours. Gavin sat in a windowless room at the Phoenix field office, flanked by his attorney and 2 federal agents, while I watched through one-way glass with Agent Vasquez. He spoke methodically, his voice flat with the exhaustion of confession: names, dates, locations, methodologies. Everything he'd been too ashamed to admit until now. The training materials were professional, Gavin explained. Bound booklets, PowerPoint presentations, case studies with financial projections. It wasn't some amateur operation, it felt like a corporate onboarding program. Did you keep any of the materials? Agent Chen asked. Nicole destroyed everything after Dad survived. She was paranoid about evidence, but I remember the structure. Module 1 was assessment, identifying targets, evaluating asset profiles, mapping family dynamics. Module 2 was integration, building trust, establishing financial access, normalizing control. Module 3 was documentation, creating paper trails that supported cognitive decline narratives. And Module 4? Gavin hesitated. Transition planning, how to execute the final phase guardianship filing, asset liquidation, or, he swallowed, accelerated resolution, meaning death. I stepped away from the glass, unable to watch anymore. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I leaned against the wall and tried to reconcile the son I'd raised with the man describing murder as a module in a training curriculum. Agent Vasquez joined me. You okay? No. But I haven't been okay since March. He's giving us everything. Names of other seminar attendees, Nicole's contact protocols, descriptions of the regional meeting structure. This is the biggest break we've had in 18 months. Good, Edmund. She touched my arm. I know this is hard. Watching your son describe how he was trained to kill you, that's not something anyone should have to witness. I needed to see it. I needed to understand how it happened. How a boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard became someone who could watch me die slowly and call it a business decision. And do you understand? I thought about Maggie's death, how Gavin had withdrawn afterward, how I'd been too consumed with my own grief to notice his spiral. I thought about the gambling, the debts, the desperation I'd never known about because my son had learned early that asking for help meant admitting weakness. I understand that I failed him, I said quietly. Not in a way that excuses what he did, nothing excuses that. But I taught him that strength meant suffering alone. I taught him that my approval had to be earned, never assumed. And when he was drowning, he didn't reach for me because I'd spent his whole life making him afraid of my disappointment. Vasquez was silent for a moment. That's a heavy burden to carry. It's the truth. And the truth is the only thing I have left. The investigation accelerated over the following weeks. Gavin's information led to 12 additional arrests across Arizona seminar graduates who'd successfully transitioned their elderly relatives, some through guardianship fraud, others through methods that were being reclassified from natural deaths to homicides. Nicole, confronted with Gavin's testimony, began cooperating from her prison cell. She confirmed the architect's existence and provided partial contact information. Encrypted email addresses, burner phone numbers, a physical description of a woman in her 60s with silver hair and an East Coast accent. She met with regional operators quarterly, Nicole told interrogators. Always in person, always at different locations. She paid in cash and communicated through intermediaries. I never knew her real name, no one did. But you could identify her? If I saw her again? Absolutely. She has a scar on her left hand, between the thumb and forefinger. Burn mark, she said. And she always wore the same necklace, a gold pendant shaped like a key. A key. The symbol felt deliberate, someone who saw herself as unlocking potential, opening doors to wealth that family members believed they deserved. On November 12th, exactly 1 year after the party where Gavin had handed me a dog bowl full of wet food, the FBI identified the architect. Her name was Eleanor Vance, 71 years old, former estate attorney in Connecticut, disbarred in 2009 for client fund misappropriation. She'd reinvented herself as a financial educator and spent the past 15 years building a nationwide network of elder exploitation. She started small, Vasquez explained during the task force briefing. Seminars at community centers, targeting families with inheritance anxiety. Then she realized the real money wasn't in the exploitation itself, it was in teaching others to exploit. She franchised the methodology, took a percentage of every successful case, and insulated herself through layers of intermediaries. How many victims total? We're still counting. Current estimate is over 2,000 families across 12 states. Financial losses exceeding $340 million. And at least 47 deaths we're now investigating as potential homicides. 47 deaths. 47 people killed by their own families, trained by a woman who'd turned patricide into a profit center. I thought about Maggie, about the promise I'd made at her grave. Asterisk, I won't let this destroy me. I'll build something from the ashes. Asterisk. When do we take her down? Arrest warrants are being coordinated across 6 jurisdictions. We move in 72 hours. Vasquez met my eyes. You've earned the right to be there, Edmund. If you want it. I wanted it. God help me. I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything since watching my son led away in handcuffs. I'll be there. The arrest happened at dawn. I sat in the back of an FBI surveillance van parked on a tree-lined street in Sedona, watching Eleanor Vance's rental property through a monitor. The house was modest by local standards, a two-story adobe with a red tile roof and a courtyard garden, the kind of place a retired professional might choose for a quiet desert life. Nothing about it suggested the headquarters of a $340 million criminal enterprise. But the encryption equipment in the basement told a different story. All units in position. Agent Vasquez's voice crackled through the radio. Target confirmed inside. 2 additional occupants believed to be administrative staff. Local PD has the perimeter. FBI HRT is standing by. I adjusted my earpiece. Vasquez had insisted I stay in the van. Civilian observer status didn't extend to breaching doors. But she'd promised I would see Eleanor Vance in handcuffs before the morning was over. Execute on my mark. A pause. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The monitors erupted with movement. Tactical officers flowed toward the house from 3 directions, their black uniforms stark against the pink desert sunrise. The front door gave way on the second ram strike. Shouts of FBI. Federal warrant echoed through the audio feed. For 47 seconds, I watched chaos unfold across 6 camera angles. Then, target in custody. Building secure. No shots fired. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. They brought Eleanor Vance out through the front door at 6:23 a.m. She was smaller than I'd imagined, 5'4". Silver hair cut short. Dressed in a cream-colored blouse and pressed slacks. Even in handcuffs, she carried herself with the composure of someone who'd prepared for this moment. Her eyes swept the assembled vehicles, the tactical officers, the media vans already gathering at the perimeter. When her gaze found the surveillance van found me times watching through the tinted window, she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a defeated smile, a knowing smile, as if we were colleagues meeting at a conference, rather than predator and prey, finally facing each other. Vasquez intercepted her before she reached the transport vehicle. Eleanor Vance, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, money laundering, and RICO violations. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Agent Vasquez. Vance's voice was cultured, precise, the voice of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. I was practicing law before you graduated high school, though I must say, your investigation was impressive. The Hartley connection was particularly clever. She looked at the van again. At me. Is he watching? Edmund Hartley? The forensic auditor who should have died like all the others, but didn't? Vasquez didn't answer. Tell him I'm looking forward to our conversation. I've read his case file extensively. A man who survives his own son's murder attempt and then dismantles a 15-year operation in 11 months? She laughed softly. That's not luck. That's destiny. They put her in the transport vehicle. The door slammed shut, but her words lingered in the morning air, like smoke from a distant fire. Destiny. The evidence recovery took 3 days. Eleanor Vance had been meticulous, encrypted drives, coded ledgers, burner phones with rotating numbers, but she'd also been arrogant. She'd kept records, detailed records, names of every regional operator she'd trained, financial projections for every transition her network had executed, even performance reviews, grading her graduates on efficiency, discretion, and yield optimization. She ran it like a Fortune 500 company, Vasquez said, spreading documents across the conference table. Quarterly earnings calls with regional managers, training retreats at resort locations, annual bonuses tied to revenue targets, revenue from stolen inheritances, and insurance payouts, and liquidated real estate, and pension funds drained by children who'd been taught to see their parents as ATMs with expiration dates. I picked up one of the documents, a spreadsheet titled Southwest Region Q3 Performance. Nicole Price's name appeared on line 7, with annotations indicating a $127,000 gross yield from the Hartley transition, and a notation that the case had been prematurely terminated due to external intervention. External intervention. That was me. That was Rosa whispering times don't drink it times in a moment that had saved my life and unraveled an empire. How many total victims? Vasquez pulled up a database on her laptop. Confirmed. 2,347 families across 12 states. Estimated financial losses. $412 million. Deaths under investigation. 63. With DNA and toxicology reviews pending on another 140. 63 confirmed murders. 140 possible additional homicides, all orchestrated by a 71-year-old woman who'd found a way to monetize the darkest impulses of family dysfunction. Will she talk? Her attorney's already fishing for a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for life without parole instead of the death penalty. Texas and Florida both have capital cases pending victims who died from accelerated transitions in those jurisdictions. I thought about Eleanor Vance's smile, the calm certainty in her eyes. She'll talk. She's proud of what she built. She wants someone to understand it. That's what I'm counting on. Vasquez closed her laptop. The prosecutor wants you in the room when we debrief her. Your presence unsettles her. You're the one who got away. When? Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and stared at the whiteboard. The red pins had multiplied not just Maricopa County anymore, but clusters across Arizona, Nevada, California. Each pin represented a family destroyed by Eleanor Vance's curriculum. Each pin represented a son or daughter who'd been taught that killing a parent was just smart financial planning. 63 confirmed dead. Perhaps 200 more. And tomorrow, I would sit across from the woman who'd made it all possible. I picked up my phone and dialed Gavin's prison number. The call connected after 4 rings. We got her. Eleanor Vance. She's in federal custody. Silence. Then, quietly. Good. I'm meeting with her tomorrow. The FBI wants me there, for the debrief, because I'm the one who survived. Because my survival led to her capture. Because I paused, searching for words. Because I need to understand how someone builds a machine for destroying families. You won't find the answer you're looking for, Dad. I've thought about it every day since the arrest. How did I become capable of this? There's no satisfying explanation. There's just 1,000 small surrenders until the unthinkable becomes routine. That's what scares me. It should. A long pause. Be careful tomorrow. Women like her, they don't see people. They see resources. And you're a resource she failed to extract. That makes you a loose end. I know. Dad? His voice cracked. I'm glad you're the one who stopped her. I'm glad something good came from what I did. Fine 17 greft. I'm mother not. I closed my eyes. Good night, Gavin. Good night, Dad. She was waiting for me when I entered the interrogation room. Eleanor Vance sat behind a metal table, her hands folded, her posture perfect, despite the orange jumpsuit that had replaced her pressed slacks. The gold key pendant was gone, confiscated as evidence, but the burn scar on her left hand was visible, a pale ridge of tissue between thumb and forefinger. Mr. Hartley. She smiled, as if greeting a dinner guest. I've been looking forward to this. I took the seat across from her. Agent Vasquez stood by the door, a recording device blinking red on the table between us. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and something else, something I couldn't identify until I realized it was her perfume. Expensive and floral, incongruous in this concrete box. You wanted to understand, Vance continued. That's why you're here. Not for the FBI, they have their evidence, their case files, their conviction statistics. You're here because you need to know times why, asterisk. Why you built a system to help children murder their parents. Why I built a system to times liberate times them. Her eyes glittered. There's a difference, Mr. Hartley. A significant one. She spoke for 2 hours without interruption. Her voice never wavered, never rose in anger or dropped in shame. She delivered her philosophy like a lecture measured articulate, terrifyingly coherent. "The family unit is a myth," she began. "A social construct designed to transfer wealth across generations without examination. Parents accumulate assets through decades of labor, then pass them to children who had no role in creating that wealth. Children who may be incompetent, ungrateful, or simply unlucky. The inheritance system rewards biological accident, not merit. So, you decided to... what? Redistribute wealth through murder? I decided to times accelerate time's natural processes." She leaned forward. "Every person in my network was already trapped in an untenable situation. Debt, addiction, failed businesses, marriages collapsing under financial pressure. They were watching their parents sit on mountains of assets while their own lives crumbled. The resentment was already there. Mr. Hartley, I simply gave it structure. You gave it methodology. Training materials. Profit margins. I gave it times efficiency asterisk." Her smile widened. "Do you know what the average inheritance dispute costs in legal fees? Approximately $50,000, often stretching for years. My clients achieved resolution in months, with far less wastage. Everyone benefited. The children received their inheritances early. The parents were spared prolonged decline in substandard facilities, and the legal system was freed from endless probate battles. The parents were times killed asterisk. The parents were times transitioned asterisk. Peacefully. In most cases. The diphenhydramine protocol was specifically designed to minimize suffering gradual cognitive decline, followed by organ failure that appeared natural. No pain, no awareness, just a gentle closing of accounts. I felt my stomach turn. She described murder the way an accountant described depreciation, a necessary adjustment in the ledger of life. "Why are you telling me this?" Vance studied me for a long moment. "Because you're the anomaly, Mr. Hartley. In 15 years and 2,347 cases, you're the only target who survived times and times fought back." Rosa Martinez disrupted the timeline. "Yes, but plenty of interventions have occurred over the years. Family members who grew suspicious, medical professionals who asked questions. None of them did what you did. None of them times dismantled the operation asterisk. I had training. 34 years of investigating financial crimes. You had more than training. You had purpose." She tilted her head. "When your son tried to kill you, you could have collapsed. You could have processed your grief, testified at his trial, and retired to a quiet life of victimhood. Instead, you built a counter-network. You mapped my operations. You turned your tragedy into a weapon. Because what you did was evil. Because what I did was times effective asterisk. And effectiveness offends people who lack the courage to be effective themselves." She leaned back. "I'm not a monster, Mr. Hartley. I'm an entrepreneur who identified a market inefficiency and developed a scalable solution. The fact that the market involved human lives doesn't change the underlying economics. You're insane. I'm honest. There's a difference, though. I understand why you'd find it uncomfortable." The room fell silent. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system, the scratch of Vasquez's pen as she took notes by the door. "Your son was one of my best graduates," Vance said quietly. "Nicole identified him early, a man drowning in debt, desperate for approval, terrified of his father's disappointment. The psychological profile was textbook. She cultivated him for 18 months before the first seminar." "You're saying she targeted us specifically?" "I'm saying you were never random victims. Your family dynamics made you ideal candidates. A distant, achievement-focused father. A son who measured his worth by paternal approval. A deceased mother whose memory created guilt and obligation." She spread her hands. "Nicole didn't seduce Gavin into a scheme. She identified a wound and offered a bandage. The fact that the bandage was poisoned, well, that was simply the cost of healing. Healing. The word tasted like ash. Freedom. Financial independence. Release from the burden of waiting for a parent to die naturally while your own life withered." Vance's voice softened. I've met thousands of children trapped in exactly that position, Mr. Hartley. Watching parents hoard wealth while grandchildren go without. Watching inheritance shrink through medical bills and long-term care. Watching their futures evaporate in the slow-motion tragedy of geriatric decline. And your solution was murder. My solution was times agency asterisk. I taught people to take control of their circumstances instead of waiting for biology to solve their problems. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the concrete floor. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. Maybe you'll face execution in Texas or Florida. And when you're sitting in that cell, waiting for the needle, or just waiting to die, I want you to remember something. Vance raised an eyebrow. What's that? Every single person you liberated was someone's child once. Someone held them as babies. Someone taught them to walk, to read, to trust. And you taught them to destroy that trust, for money. I leaned down until my face was inches from hers. You didn't build an empire. You built a graveyard. And now, you'll rot in it. Her smile didn't waver. Perhaps. But my ideas will outlive us both, Mr. Hartley. Every child watching a parent decline will feel that whisper, times there's another way, asterisk. I didn't create that impulse. I simply gave it permission. I walked out without looking back. The federal courthouse in Phoenix was standing room only. I'd testified in dozens of trials during my bureau career. Corporate fraud cases, money laundering operations, RICO prosecutions that had made national headlines. But I'd never walked into a courtroom where every seat was filled with people who'd lost someone to the defendant's enterprise. Families of the 63, confirmed dead. Survivors who'd escaped like I had. Journalists documenting what the media had dubbed the largest elder abuse conspiracy in American history. Eleanor Vance sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, her silver hair immaculate, her expression serene. She'd rejected the plea deal, insisted on trial, claimed she wanted the truth to emerge. Her attorney, a high-profile criminal defender from New York, had promised the jury that his client was merely a financial educator victimized by overzealous prosecution. The jury wasn't buying it. I could see it in their faces, 12 ordinary people confronted with spreadsheets of stolen inheritances and photographs of elderly victims who'd trusted their own children. The prosecution calls Edmund James Hartley. I rose from my seat in the gallery and walked toward the witness stand. Prosecutor Amanda Chen guided me through my history, first 34 years with the FBI, specialization in financial crimes, retirement in 2019. She established my credentials before steering toward the personal. Mr. Hartley, can you describe your relationship with your son Gavin prior to November 2024? We had a complicated relationship. Distant, at times. He struggled after his mother's death. And I paused, choosing honesty over pride. I wasn't the father he needed. I prioritized work over presence. I measured success in achievements rather than emotional connection. And were you aware of his financial difficulties? No. He never told me about the gambling, the debts, the loan sharks. I learned about all of it only after the investigation began. When did you first realize something was wrong? I told them about the party. The dog bowl. Rosa's whispered warning. The tea I didn't drink. I described the months of chemical fog, the confusion, the memory lapses, the manufactured cognitive decline that had been building toward guardianship and death. What saved your life, Mr. Hartley? Rosa Martinez. A housekeeper who'd worked for my family for 11 years. She saw what was happening when I was too drugged to see it myself. She whispered 4 words, "Times don't drink it. Please trust me, Times." And those words gave me the clarity to survive. The courtroom was silent. In the gallery, I saw Rosa dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The cross-examination was brutal. Vance's attorney, a silver-tongued man named Harrison Crawford, approached the podium with a stack of documents and a predator's smile. "Mr. Hartley, you testified that you were a distant father. Would you say your parenting style contributed to your son's psychological vulnerabilities?" Objection relevance. Goes to the witness's credibility regarding family dynamics, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness may answer. I met Crawford's eyes. Yes. My failures as a father created wounds that others exploited. But my failures didn't teach Gavin to poison me. Your client did that. Crawford's smile flickered. You have a personal vendetta against Miss Vance, don't you? She represents the system that nearly killed you. Your testimony is colored by that trauma. My testimony is colored by evidence. Financial records. Training materials. A network that systematically taught children to murder their parents for inheritance money. I didn't create that evidence, your client did. And she kept meticulous records because she was proud of what she built. You claim Miss Vance trained your son. Do you have any direct evidence that she personally interacted with Gavin Hartley? Nicole Price Miranda Castellano testified that she attended quarterly meetings with your client, received training materials from your client, and paid percentages of her yields to your client. Gavin attended seminars organized by Nicole, using curricula developed by your client. The chain of responsibility is documented by co-conspirators seeking reduced sentences, documented by financial records your client kept in her own handwriting, documented by emails from her encrypted server, documented by 47 regional operators who've provided consistent testimony about her role as the network's architect. Crawford retreated slightly. No. Further questions. Prosecutor Chen approached for redirect. Mr. Hartley, the defense has suggested your testimony is motivated by personal vendetta. Is that accurate? No. I looked at the jury, 12 faces carrying the weight of what they'd learned. I'm here because 2,347 families were victimized by a system designed to turn children into murderers. I'm here because 63 people are confirmed dead, with hundreds more under investigation. I'm here because the woman sitting at that table looked me in the eye and told me she was proud of what she built, that she saw herself as an entrepreneur solving a market inefficiency. I turned to face Eleanor Vance directly. I'm here because when I asked her why she did it, she said her ideas would outlive us both. That every child watching a parent decline would feel the whisper and know there was another way. I paused. I'm here to make sure that whisper gets drowned out by the truth, that what she built wasn't liberation or efficiency. It was industrialized murder. And every person who followed her curriculum was a victim too of their own desperation, yes, but also of a predator who taught them that killing family was just good financial planning. The courtroom remained silent. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. No further questions. I stepped down from the witness stand and walked past the defense table. Eleanor Vance caught my eye. For the first time since I'd met her, the serene smile was gone. In its place was something I hadn't expected to see. Respect. She nodded, once a small acknowledgement between adversaries. I didn't nod back. The jury deliberated for 6 days. 6 days of waiting in hotel rooms and courthouse hallways, drinking bad coffee and checking my phone every few minutes for news that never came. 6 days of wondering whether 12 strangers would see what I saw, not just evidence of crimes, but evidence of a philosophy that had poisoned thousands of families. Rosa stayed with me through most of it. She'd flown to Phoenix for my testimony and refused to leave until the verdict was read. We sat together in the courthouse cafeteria, playing cards to pass the time, not talking about the case because there was nothing left to say. You did everything you could, she told me on day 4. Whatever happens now, you did everything. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But you're not God, Mr. Hartley. You can't control what 12 people decide in a room you'll never enter. On day 6, the jury sent word. They'd reached a verdict. The courtroom felt different now. The same seats, the same fluorescent lights, the same portrait of a stern-faced judge hanging behind the bench. But the energy had shifted, charged with anticipation, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. Families of victims filled the gallery, some holding photographs of parents they'd lost. Journalists clutched notebooks. Agent Vasquez stood against the back wall, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Eleanor Vance was led in by 2 marshals. She'd aged during the trial, subtle changes I might have missed if I hadn't been watching closely. The perfect posture had developed a slight slump. The serene smile appeared less frequently. Even her silver hair seemed duller, as if the fluorescent lights had finally found a way to diminish her. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Whitmore, presiding. We stood. The judge entered. We sat. I understand the jury has reached a verdict. Foreperson, please stand. A woman in her 50s rose from the jury box, gray cardigan, reading glasses, the kind of face you'd see at a PTA meeting or a church bake sale. She held a folded paper in trembling hands. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Eleanor Marie Vance, guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Someone in the gallery sobbed a sharp, relieved sound that broke through the formal silence. On the charge of racketeering under the RICO Act, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. Count after count, the foreperson's voice carried the same word. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 23 charges, 23 convictions. The complete destruction of Eleanor Vance's 15-year empire, delivered in monotone by a woman who would go home tonight and never think about inheritance fraud again. On the final charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse resulting in death, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Whitmore nodded. The jury's verdicts are accepted and entered into the record. The defendant is remanded to federal custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Eleanor Vance didn't move. I found her eyes across the courtroom. She was staring at me, not with the serene superiority she'd displayed during our interrogation room encounter, but with something closer to curiosity, as if I were a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, a variable that had disrupted her carefully calculated equations. The marshals approached to escort her out. She rose slowly, her shackled hands clasped in front of her, and paused as she passed my row. You won, Mr. Hartley. This isn't about winning. No, it's about legacy. She smiled, a small, tired expression that looked almost human. You've spent the last year building something from the ashes of what I created. A foundation, a network of advocates, a system designed to protect instead of exploit, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison, perhaps. But ideas don't die in prison, Mr. Hartley. They wait, they adapt, they find new hosts. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Every system I built can be rebuilt. Every technique I developed can be rediscovered. The question isn't whether elder exploitation will continue. It's whether your foundation will be strong enough to fight it. The marshals pulled her away. I watched her disappear through the side door, orange jumpsuit bright against the gray hallway, and wondered if she was right. Outside the courthouse, the January sun felt like absolution. Families embraced on the steps, tears mixing with relief. Journalists conducted interviews with prosecutors and victim advocates. Agent Vasquez found me standing apart from the crowd, my face turned toward the sky. You okay? I don't know yet. The sentencing hearing is in 6 weeks. Federal guidelines suggest life without parole, but Texas and Florida are still pursuing death penalty cases for the homicides in their jurisdictions. Will she be extradited? Probably. Texas wants her badly. They have 3 confirmed murders with clear evidence chains. Florida has 2 more. I thought about Eleanor Vance facing a needle in a Texas execution chamber. The thought brought no satisfaction, no sense of closure, just exhaustion, and the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. What now? Vasquez asked. I looked at the families on the courthouse steps, the survivors, the bereaved, the people who'd lost parents and grandparents to a system designed to monetize their destruction. Now I keep building. The foundation, the network. Everything she said couldn't outlast her. And if she's right, if the ideas survive, then we fight them. Every day, every case, every family we can reach, before someone like Eleanor Vance reaches them first. Vasquez nodded slowly. That's a lifetime of work. It's the only work that matters. I visited Gavin 1 week after the verdict. The drive to Florence had become familiar over the past month's 90 minutes of desert highway, the prison complex rising from the sand like a monument to broken lives. But this visit felt different, lighter. Somehow, as if the weight I'd been carrying since that November party had finally shifted into something I could bear. Gavin was already seated when they brought me to the visitation room. He looked better than he had during our last meeting, still thin, still aged beyond his years, but with something approaching clarity in his eyes. I heard about the verdict, he said. It's all over the news in here. Some of the guys recognized her from the coverage. They're calling her the grandmother of murder. Appropriate. She'll get the death penalty in Texas. Everyone says so, probably. I settled into my chair. How are you doing? Gavin was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said. About Mom. About the promise you made to her. I remember. I want you to know I'm trying. The anger management classes, the addiction counseling, the therapy sessions. I'm not doing it for parole or early release. I'm doing it because... He paused, searching for words. Because I need to understand how I became someone capable of what I did. And because I don't want to die in here as the man who poisoned his father. I studied my son's face, the familiar contours that had once reminded me so much of Maggie, now etched with the permanent marks of his choices. The restitution payments, I said. $1,294.26 every month. I got a job in the prison workshop furniture assembly. Minimum wage. But it adds up. I'll be paying you until I'm 61 years old, assuming I survive that long in here. That wasn't the point, Gavin. The payments were never about the money. I know. They're about accountability. About remembering. He met my eyes. Every time I sign that check, I think about what I stole from you. Not just the money, the trust, the years we could have had, the grandchildren I'll never give you because no woman will want a man with my history. The grandchildren comment hit harder than I expected. I'd never allowed myself to grieve that loss, the future that Gavin's choices had stolen from both of us. I've been building something, I told him. A foundation. The Hartley Foundation for Elder Protection. We've helped 47 families in Arizona so far. Identified exploitation, connected victims with legal resources, trained caregivers to recognize the warning signs. I heard. One of the counselors mentioned it. Gavin's voice wavered. She said it was doing important work. It's your legacy too, Gavin. In a way. What do you mean? What happened to us? What you did? What I survived? It's become the foundation of something that helps other people. Every family we save. Every elder we protect, it comes from the ashes of what we lost. That doesn't excuse what you did. Nothing excuses that. But it means something came out of it. Something that matters. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time since that night in my living room, I felt like I was sitting with my son, not the monster who'd poisoned me, not the defendant in an orange jumpsuit, but the boy I'd raised. The boy who'd brought me dandelions from the backyard and cried when our dog Scout disappeared. Dad? Gavin's voice was barely above a whisper. Do you think Mom would have forgiven me? The question I'd been dreading for over a year. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world, I said slowly. She would have been devastated by what you did, heartbroken beyond words. But she would never have stopped loving you. That's not the same as forgiveness. No, it's not. I reached across the table, my fingers stopping just short of his hands. Forgiveness isn't something I can give you, Gavin. It's something you have to earn, not from me, from yourself. You have to become someone who deserves forgiveness. And then, you have to live with the knowledge that you might never receive it. Is that what you're doing? Becoming someone who deserves it? I'm trying. Every day. The foundation, the advocacy, the work, it's my way of earning forgiveness for the father I wasn't, for the distance that made you afraid to ask for help, for the achievement obsession that taught you love was conditional. Gavin's eyes glistened. I never thought it was conditional. I know. But I never made sure you knew it wasn't. That's my failure, Gavin. I carry it every day, just like you carry yours. The guard signaled that our time was up. I stood, but Gavin remained seated, his shackled hands flat on the metal table. Thank you for not giving up on me completely, for leaving that window open in the restitution agreement. I don't deserve it, but thank you. I looked at my son, 36 years old, facing 35 years in prison, with nothing ahead of him but the slow work of becoming human again. Earn it, I said. Every day, Gavin. Earn it. I walked out of the visitation room and into the Arizona sunlight. For the first time in over a year, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place on a Saturday morning in March. The Hartley Foundation for Elder Protection had officially existed for 7 months, operating out of my apartment and a borrowed conference room at Diana's law firm. But today we were opening our permanent home, a modest suite on the 4th floor of a Scottsdale office building, with room for 6 staff members and a small conference area for family consultations. It wasn't much, but it was ours. You ready? Rosa asked, straightening my tie. She'd insisted on attending, even though she still worked 3 other cleaning jobs to make ends meet. When I'd offered her a full-time position at the foundation, she'd laughed and said she wasn't done scrubbing toilets yet. But she'd agreed to serve on our advisory board, the voice of the people who saw families from the inside, who knew the warning signs before anyone else. Ready as I'll ever be. The crowd outside was small but significant. Agent Vasquez had come, along with 3 members of her task force. Diana stood near the entrance with her paralegal, Sarah. Detective Marcus Webb was there, and Thomas Brennan had driven up from Tucson with his wife. Dr. Yamamoto had sent flowers when she couldn't attend a bouquet of white lilies with a card that read, "For every life you save." And scattered throughout the crowd were people I'd never met, but who'd found us anyway. Family members of victims, survivors of exploitation, caregivers who wanted to learn how to protect their clients. 47 cases in our first 7 months. 47 families who might have lost everything if someone hadn't intervened. I stepped up to the microphone. 15 months ago, I drank a cup of tea. The crowd fell silent. Some of them knew my story. Others were hearing it for the first time. That tea was poisoned by my own son and daughter-in-law. They'd been drugging me for 127 days, slowly manufacturing the appearance of cognitive decline so they could have me declared incompetent, seize my assets, and eventually let me die in a facility where no one would ask questions. I paused, letting the words settle. I survived because of a woman named Rosa Martinez, a housekeeper who'd worked for my family for 11 years. She saw what was happening when I was too drugged to see it myself. She whispered a warning that saved my life. Rosa wiped her eyes. I continued. In the months that followed, I learned that my case wasn't unique. Elder financial exploitation affects millions of Americans every year. The perpetrators are usually family members, children, grandchildren, caregivers who've been trusted with access. The victims are often too ashamed to report it, too confused to understand it, or too afraid to fight back. I gestured to the modest office behind me. This foundation exists to change that. We provide education for families and caregivers. We offer intervention services for suspected exploitation cases. We connect victims with legal resources and law enforcement, and we advocate for stronger protections at every level of government. A woman in the crowd raised her hand. Mr. Hartley, what makes your approach different from adult protective services or other elder advocacy organizations? Experience, I said simply. I spent 34 years investigating financial crimes for the FBI. I know how to follow money, identify patterns, and build cases. But more importantly, I know what it feels like to be the victim, to have your own child look at you and see a balance sheet instead of a father. I looked at the faces in the crowd, Agent Vasquez, Diana, Thomas, Rosa, the team that had assembled around me, not because I'd recruited them, but because they'd recognized the same truth I had. that this work mattered. The woman who built the network that nearly killed me believed her ideas would outlive her. She believed that the whisper, the temptation to exploit vulnerable family members, would always find new hosts. I shook my head. She was wrong, because for every whisper, there can be a louder voice. A voice that says, asterisk, this is wrong. This is not who we are. This is not who we have to be. Asterisk. I picked up the ceremonial scissors. The Hartley Foundation for Elder Protection is that voice. And today, we make it official. The ribbon fell. The crowd applauded. And somewhere in a Texas prison, Eleanor Vance waited for the needle that would end her life, while the foundation she'd inadvertently inspired began the work of saving others. The reception afterward was modest coffee, pastries, conversations that turned into commitments. A banker from Chase offered to flag suspicious account activity for review. A geriatrician from Scottsdale Healthcare volunteered to train our staff on recognizing chemical exploitation. A retired judge promised to advocate for stronger guardianship oversight in the state legislature. By the end of the morning, we had 12 new volunteers, 3 major donors, and a waiting list of families requesting consultations. Not bad for a first day, Thomas observed, surveying the crowd. It's a start. It's more than that, Edmund. He clasped my shoulder. You built something real. Something that will outlast all of us. I thought about Maggie, about the promise I'd made at her grave, to build something from the ashes of our family's destruction. That's the plan, I said quietly. That's always been the plan. By summer, the foundation had outgrown its original space. We moved to a larger suite on the 7th floor, still modest by corporate standards, but with room for the team that had assembled around our mission. 10 employees now, plus a rotating roster of volunteers who staffed our hotline and helped with community outreach. The waiting list for consultations had grown to 3 months. We need to hire faster, Diana observed during our weekly strategy meeting. She'd officially joined as general counsel in April, leaving her private practice to focus full-time on elder protection law. The demand is outpacing our capacity. We need to hire times carefully, asterisk, I corrected. Every person who works here represents our mission. One bad hire could undermine years of trust building. Rosa nodded from her seat at the conference table. She'd finally accepted my offer, Director of Victim Services, responsible for the human side of our work while the lawyers and analysts handled the technical aspects. She still cleaned houses on weekends, but now it was by choice, not necessity. The families we serve are vulnerable, she said. They've already been betrayed by people they trusted. The team that had assembled around us was unlike anything I'd imagined during those dark days in the travel lodge. Thomas Brennan had come out of retirement to serve as our chief investigator. At 74, he still had the sharpest analytical mind I'd ever encountered and a network of former law enforcement contacts that stretched across 12 states. He'd already helped us identify patterns that local agencies had missed, connecting seemingly isolated cases into larger exploitation networks. Same methodology keeps appearing, he reported during our Monday briefing. The telehealth prescription scam, the guardianship pipeline, the memory vitamin protocol. Eleanor Vance is dead, but her curriculum is still circulating. Someone's teaching new graduates. Copycat operations? More like franchise remnants. Regional operators who weren't caught in Operation Golden Shield. They're adapting, going deeper, underground. Detective Marcus Webb had joined us part-time after retiring from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. He coordinated with law enforcement across Arizona, ensuring that our case referrals received proper attention. Too many exploitation reports died in bureaucratic limbo. Webb made sure ours reached desks that would act on them. Dr. Yamamoto had assembled a medical advisory board, geriatricians, toxicologists, and neurologists who could distinguish between genuine cognitive decline and chemically induced impairment. They'd already helped us identify 6 cases where dementia diagnoses were actually prolonged drugging. And then there was Sarah Chen. Sarah had been Diana's paralegal during the criminal investigation. The young woman with sharp eyes and faster fingers who'd built our evidence database during those frantic November days. She'd graduated law school the previous spring and passed the bar on her first attempt. "I want to work here," she'd told me during her interview. "What we do is exhausting, emotionally draining. You'll hear stories that will keep you awake at night." I know. She'd met my eyes with a steadiness that reminded me of her generation's particular brand of determination. My grandmother was exploited by a caregiver when I was in high school. We didn't know what was happening until she'd lost everything. She died in a state facility, alone, because we couldn't afford anything better. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Give me a job." Sarah was now our director of legal services, managing a team of 3 attorneys who provided free representation to exploitation victims. She worked 12-hour days, never complained, and had a gift for translating complex legal concepts into language that frightened families could understand. The afternoon sun streamed through the conference room windows as I looked around the table at my team. Rosa, who'd saved my life with 4 whispered words. Thomas, who'd known me for 30 years and believed in me when I had nothing left to believe in myself. Diana, who'd taken my case when I was a confused old man in a motel room. Marcus, who'd helped me bring down the son I loved. Sarah, who carried her own grief like fuel for the work ahead. "We've helped 127 families since the foundation launched," I said. "Identified $4.3 million in stolen assets. Supported 14 criminal prosecutions. Trained over 500 healthcare workers and financial professionals to recognize exploitation warning signs. And we're just getting started," Thomas added. "We're just getting started." I stood and walked to the window. Scottsdale spread out below us, a city of golf courses and retirement communities, of families gathering for Sunday dinners, of children who might be tempted by that whisper Eleanor Vance had described. "The woman who built the network that nearly killed me believed her ideas would outlive her," I said quietly. She was right. They do outlive her in every family that's vulnerable. Every child who's desperate. Every system that makes exploitation easier than asking for help. I turned to face my team. "But we outlive her too. Every case we solve, every family we protect, every exploitation we prevent, it's a refutation of everything she believed. She thought human nature was on her side. We're proving her wrong," Rosa smiled. "One family at a time. One family at a time." November 12th arrived like an old wound reopening. 1 year. 12 months since the party. The dog bowl. The moment my son looked at me and saw something to be discarded rather than loved. I'd thought I was prepared for the anniversary, thought the foundation work and the trial and the conviction had given me enough distance to face this day without falling apart. I was wrong. I woke at 3 a.m., sweating through my sheets, the phantom taste of herbal tea coating my tongue. The nightmare had been vivid. Rosa's whispered warning arriving too late. The seizure hitting me instead of Miranda. My son watching calmly as I convulsed on the dining room floor. Sleep wouldn't return. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching Scottsdale emerge from darkness into the gray light of pre-dawn. 1 year since I'd learned what my son was capable of. 1 year since I'd started becoming someone else. Rosa arrived at 7 a.m. without being asked. She brought pan dulce from her favorite bakery and a thermos of Mexican hot chocolate comfort foods from her childhood, offered without explanation. We sat at my small kitchen table and ate in silence. The way people do when words are insufficient. "I remember this day differently," she finally said. "I remember it as the day I almost lost you. The day everything I'd been watching finally came to a point. You saved my life, Rosa. I delayed the inevitable. You saved your own life by fighting, by not giving up, by building something from the ashes." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Maggie would be so proud of you." The mention of my wife's name cracked something open inside me. "I miss her," I whispered. "Every day, I miss her. And I hate that Gavin took that from me too. The ability to grieve her properly, without it being tangled up in what he did." Grief doesn't follow rules, Mr. Hartley. It takes whatever shape it needs to take. Edmund. What? After everything we've been through. Rosa. I think you can call me Edmund. She smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her usually serious face. Edmund, it suits you better anyway. Mr. Hartley always sounded like someone else. Someone older. I am older. 73 now. Ancient. 73. And fighting. That's not ancient. That's alive. The foundation held a small gathering that evening, not a celebration. Exactly. But an acknowledgement. We'd invited the families we'd helped over the past year, along with volunteers, donors, and partners. About 60 people filled our conference room, holding glasses of sparkling cider and sharing stories of survival. The walls displayed photographs and testimonials, faces of elderly victims who'd been saved from exploitation, families who'd found justice through our advocacy. Thomas had created a memorial section for those who hadn't survived the 63 confirmed victims of Eleanor Vance's network, along with dozens more who'd been lost to exploitation before anyone intervened. Their photographs formed a grid of silent witnesses, reminding us why the work mattered. I stood before the gathering, my notes trembling slightly in my hands. 1 year ago today, I learned that my son had been poisoning me for 127 days. He'd been trained by a network that taught him to see me as an obstacle, a balance sheet to be liquidated, a problem to be solved with chemicals and legal paperwork. The room was silent. I survived because of the woman standing to my left. I gestured to Rosa, who ducked her head in characteristic modesty. And I rebuilt because of the people in this room, friends who believed in me, professionals who shared my mission, families who trusted us with their most painful secrets. I looked at the memorial wall. But we're not here to celebrate survival. We're here to honor the ones who didn't make it. The parents and grandparents who were stolen from families that loved them. The elderly neighbors who died alone because the people they trusted chose money over mercy. I set down my notes. Eleanor Vance believed her ideas would outlive her. She believed that the temptation to exploit vulnerable family members was hardwired into human nature, that greed and desperation would always find each other, no matter how many predators we locked away. I paused. She was half right. The temptation does exist. The whisper she described, it's real. Every struggling child watching a parent age, every desperate heir calculating inheritance timelines, every caregiver wondering what they could take without being caught. I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd resisted that whisper, or helped others resist it. But what Eleanor Vance never understood was this. For every whisper, there's a choice. And for every person who chooses exploitation, there are dozens who choose love, who choose patience, who choose to ask for help instead of taking what isn't theirs. I raised my glass. This foundation exists to make that choice easier, to give families the resources they need, the education they deserve, and the support that might mean the difference between a parent protected and a parent lost. The room raised their glasses in return. To the ones we've saved, to the ones we couldn't, and to the ones we'll fight for. Tomorrow, the morning after the anniversary, I made coffee. It was a small thing, grinding the beans, measuring the water, waiting for the familiar gurgle of the machine. The same ritual I'd performed thousands of times across 50 years of adulthood. But as I stood in my modest kitchen, watching dark liquid fill my cup, I realized something had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. For months after the poisoning, I'd struggled with beverages. Tea was impossible. The smell alone triggered flashbacks. Coffee had been tolerable, but only if I made it myself. Watched every step, controlled every variable. The paranoia was exhausting, rational, and absolutely necessary for survival. But this morning, the paranoia was gone. I poured cream into my cup without checking the expiration date 3 times. I added sugar without wondering if someone had tampered with the container. I carried my coffee to the window and drank it while watching the sun rise over Camelback Mountain and the only thought in my mind was how beautiful the light looked against the desert rocks. The coffee was just coffee, and that was enough. Rosa called at 8 a.m. "You're awake early," she observed. "Couldn't sleep?" "Actually, I slept well. First time in months. The anniversary gathering helped? Something did." I sipped my coffee. I think I finally understand what Maggie meant. What she meant about what? Before she died, she told me to find a reason to keep living. Not just existing times, living asterisk. She said the reason would find me if I stayed open to it. And the foundation is that reason? The foundation is part of it. But the real reason. I paused, searching for words. The real reason is simpler than I expected. It's this. Coffee in the morning, sunlight through the window, the knowledge that today, somewhere, someone, will be helped because we exist. Rosa was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like peace, Edmund." "I think it is." I walked to the office that morning instead of driving. The November air was cool but not cold. Perfect weather for the 2-mile route through residential streets and shopping centers. I passed families walking dogs, retirees tending gardens, young parents pushing strollers toward the park, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the predators who might someday target them or the foundation that stood ready to help if they did. The office was quiet when I arrived. Sarah was already at her desk, reviewing case files with the intensity that defined her work. Thomas sat in the conference room, mapping connections on the whiteboard. Rosa wouldn't arrive until noon. She still insisted on cleaning her Thursday houses, despite my protests that she'd earned the right to rest. I poured myself a second cup of coffee from the office machine, something I wouldn't have done 6 months ago, and sat at my desk. The inbox held the usual mix. Consultation requests from families, donation acknowledgments, a legislative update from our advocacy team. One email caught my attention. A message from a woman in Tucson whose mother was showing signs of exploitation by a live-in caregiver. Asterisk. "Dear Mr. Hartley. Asterisk. Asterisk. I don't know if you can help, but I don't know who else to ask. My mother is 79 years old and has been getting confused lately. Her caregiver, someone we hired through an agency, has been handling her finances for the past 6 months. Last week, I discovered that Mom's savings account is nearly empty. When I asked her about it, she said she gave the money to help with expenses, but couldn't explain what expenses she meant. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm scared. I don't know if I'm overreacting or if something terrible is happening. Everyone I've talked to says I should wait and see, but my gut tells me we don't have time to wait. Asterisk. Asterisk. Please, if there's anything you can do, anything at all, I need someone to listen. Asterisk. S1. Asterisk. Sincerely, asterisk. Maria Gonzalez. I read the email twice, then picked up the phone. Mrs. Gonzalez. This is Edmund Hartley, from the Hartley Foundation. I received your message, and I want you to know you're not overreacting. Your instincts are right to be concerned. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. Tell me everything, I said. Start from the beginning. We're going to help your mother. The call lasted 45 minutes. By the end, I'd scheduled a consultation for the following day, assigned Sarah to research the caregiver agency, and asked Thomas to run preliminary financial analysis on the account withdrawals. Another case, another family, another chance to do what Eleanor Vance said couldn't be done. I hung up the phone and looked around my office. On the wall hung a photograph of Maggie, the one from our 30th anniversary. Her smile bright against the Arizona sunset. Beside it was a framed copy of the Foundation's mission statement, the words I'd written during those dark days in the travel lodge. Asterisk. Defending the dignity of aging through education, intervention, and justice. Asterisk. And next to that, a small frame containing 4 words, handwritten on a scrap of paper. Asterisk. Don't drink it. Trust me. Asterisk. I finished my coffee, set the cup aside, and turned back to my computer. There was work to do.